evening. Thank you for coming.
I would all turn your mics on.
Sorry. I guess move it on this side, huh? No, mine's coming up right. Start over. Good evening. Thank you all for coming to the June 12th Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. I call to order. Roll call, please.
Eric Griffith here.
Michael, I.
Lynn.
Here.
Slow down. I usually do that. Lynn here.
Amanda here.
Daryl here.
Jeff here.
Rise. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. So has everybody had the opportunity to read tonight's agenda? Are there any additions, corrections, requests? No. May I have a motion to approve tonight's agenda, please?
I make a motion to approve tonight's agenda of June 12th, 2024.
May I have a second?
I'll second it.
Motion by Amanda, seconded by Darren and Michael. May I ask if anybody has anything for tonight's minutes? Any corrections, changes? I have one small one. I would like to request the minutes amend to state that I requested clarifications on the bedroom numbers on page 13 and page 19 because they were a little different. And we explained it, how it got there. And then I asked for clarification on parking on pages 17 and page 19. On one, it said there were 2, on the other, it said it was 4, and it was 2 garages but 4 parking spaces. So if you could see that that's included in the notice, then please.
I had one thing also, I'm not sure if it was actually for the agenda, for the minutes or not, but we were discussing about the outdoor fires and the, wildland fire and all that, and CDOT. And I said I would get with the fire chief
Okay,
to
let's
find
hold
out.
on that and we'll talk about that under commission comments.
If you have an update, that'll be under commission.
Okay.
Okay. So are there any conflicts of interest?
Can I have a motion?
Oh, motion,
I'll
sorry.
make a motion to approve the minutes as amended.
Second?
I second the motion.
Motion by Jeff, second by Amanda, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, declaration of conflicts and interest on anything that is not on, or that is on tonight's agenda. No. Okay, public comment. Does anybody have anything they would like to say that is not pertaining to tonight's agenda? No, so we close public comment.
And no response.
This time around. We have no special presentations.
The special presentations was moved to the end.
Training.
I'm looking at the last one, so. I was looking at my corrections to the minutes. I apologize. Okay. Design review and land use public hearings. We're going to start with 171 Main Street and 191 Main Street, temporary use permit, summer bike parking. And I assume that's why you're here, Cindy.
It is.
Good.
Do you want me to just start?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, so the town is requesting to erect a temporary 20 by 20 tent, which would go primarily at 171. It would go next to Colorado Mattress in front of the blue shed, for lack of a better description. And the intent would be for summer bike parking. And part of why we want to do the tent is to create a sense of place. So we would be doing some fun signage and hopefully painting the bike racks, some fun colors, and just trying to create a sense for downtown bike parking, because we haven't really had a specific bike parking area downtown thus far. We've had some racks spread throughout town, and we haven't had one designated area. So we're trying to create that sort of in conjunction with the market. We have an existing 20 by 20 tent that has not been used in quite some time, but this is a tent that requires being staked into the ground, hence the request for the temporary use permit. Because this would remain up all summer. It wouldn't come down week to week. It would be up through the summer with the intention of being up through the end of September.
Okay.
Questions?
Does anybody have any questions of Cindy?
I do.
Go ahead.
I have
pregnant and
You have one too?
Well, it's
Eric,
just-
do you have anything?
I just have a curiosity question.
Sure.
I think it's a good idea, but, so that, whose property does that sit on?
It sits on MR Minturn property. We do have permission from MR Minturn to use the property. We also got permission from the owners of the Holy Toledo property because it may encroach a little bit onto their just onto their property line a little bit. So we have permission from both property owners.
Sounds good. And you answered my other question when you were explaining it, because I was like, you gotta have racks, but apparently.
Yes, we have the racks. We just have not had them in I guess, more of a consolidated area. So we're going to have some fun painting and, like I said, doing some fun signage, trying to create a sense of place. The other thing that we started working on in preparation for this is some additional wayfinding signage from where the new bike path ends. We're going to try to create some signs to sort of direct people into town and to said bike parking.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great idea, and actually, even though it's not relevant, I rode that new bike path with my kids the other day. I forget who it was, told me, go check it out, and it's awesome. It's super cool.
Let's go back to you, Eric. You have a question
Oh,
or?
I was just looking at the location, but the location seems great.
Okay. Amanda?
Okay, I always have questions.
Sure.
How many bikes do you think are going to be able to fit underneath the 20 by 20?
I think, you know what, we talked about this when we first started talking about it, and now I don't remember the number. I would anticipate that we could fit, it's a pretty good sized tent. I will have to get an exact number.
How many racks?
Well,
What
I mean, we
size?
have a lot of racks. We have like 8 racks. Some of them are quite large. Some of them can do both sides. But I would estimate that we would be able to get maybe 40.
Okay, and
Let me do some double checking. on that.
okay, because cars today are allowed to park in front of that area. Are you expecting that you're gonna block off parking in front of it, or are you
We
gonna-
won't be blocking off any parking or the sidewalk. It'll all be in grass.
And how are you going to, because right now, that traffic area is pretty bad with people crossing in the middle of traffic, not using the crosswalk. So how are you going to ensure users coming in from where, the bike path or
Sure.
from the bike park? Because even on the bike park, they're coming on.
The bike park will be trickier, yes. Coming from the bike path and from that direction, we can use the wayfinding signage to direct people to hopefully use the correct side of the street, to actually use the crosswalk to cross to that side of the street.
Okay,
So they're not crossing off I guess outside of the crosswalk, if that makes sense. We would want people to use the actual crosswalks that are nearest to there. So that would be right when you're coming into town. And then I guess the other one would be further up.
at the, for,
Yeah,
Yeah.
at the, is it 300 block?
yeah.
I'm trying to remember. where
And the reason I'm asking is because all the bikes come in on the other side of of the highway. So when they come in on the bike park side, they're coming in on the river side.
Right.
And when they're coming in from the saloon, they're crossing the bridge on that side and they're coming in. And right now there's trouble already. So if we're
If
saying,
they're coming
hey,
in from the saloon side, they should be using the crosswalk. But I understand that we can't,
Yeah.
I mean, we obviously can't force people to do that, but we would just try to manage that behavior with signage and the
Couldn't you put-
wayfinding
Couldn't you
signage.
put signage that says, go down Eagle Street and go along the river?
I was just gonna say, coming from the other direction, yes, we
Yeah.
could,
Okay.
yes. Coming from the bike park or that direction, we could do signage to direct people down, right, along the river, down Eagle River Street, and to come around that way.
okay, and then again, with still allowing parking in front of that, I just foresee this to be a pretty congested area, especially with the amount of bikes that you're suggesting, that it could end up being problematic with cars pulling in, bikes crossing the street. And right now, that area of 100 block is already problematic, especially during, 9 a.m. to 10 a.m., it's pretty bad. With people not using the crosswalks and just running across that road. So then when you add all of this bike traffic, I feel like we're setting ourselves up. And then my other question was that I've heard that the bike shop is also looking at putting a bike parking behind their unit. So have you worked with those business owners, Minturn Sunrise and those business owners, because they own the property behind? And they were also, I think, exploring some bike parking.
I am not aware that they were exploring bike parking behind, so I will have a conversation with them. But I did talk briefly, although it was a little while ago, with Brady at Evoke. But of course, he's renting that space, so I'll have to talk to the property owner too. But no, I was not aware that they were doing that. So I can certainly make some notes to talk with them. The other thing I would add, though, is sorry, with regard to the crosswalks, or with regard to right in front of there with parking, I don't know how that might be impacted when we do the additional or the extended line of sight painting.
Clear vision.
Yeah,
Both of those corners are, I haven't looked at that per se in here, but the one end has the bus. so
right,
that's a
which
big
people
spot.
aren't supposed to be parking in
No,
front of the
but
bus
they
stop
do.
already.
And
They do.
down by Holy Toledo, it's pretty good too. It may not affect it too much. There's only 2 or 3 real spots there.
Right.
But people like turn on their hazards all the time and just pull over
Oh,
to go
all the
running,
time.
get food,
All the time.
everything. I'm just questioning the decision for that space. The other question I was gonna ask is how, you said it's not gonna impinge on the sidewalk in the I guess, how far is the setback of the tent?
It will go pretty much up to the sidewalk, but not across the sidewalk
Okay.
in any way.
And then are you going to put any sort of fencing so people can't park their bikes into the sidewalk, where like gates or anything, so that they have to go park with underneath it?
That would have to be something that's added to the plan because we don't currently have fencing for that. But it's certainly something we can add and look at.
And then my last question has to do, as it's temporary, so once it comes down with the amount of bikes, all the traffic, that's gonna do some damage to what's already there right now, which is grass area. People sometimes I see sitting there when their families are shopping at Holy Toledo. There used to be even, I think, a bench
Picnic table
there,
there in the
picnic
summer.
table there. So are you guys planning on revegetating it after the bike? Cause it's gonna
It'll
be,
damage it badly.
it's gonna take it out.
I will definitely put in that suggestion, and I'm sure that can be accommodated. So I just want to recap. So
Nothing.
Jeff? Okay, backtracking to Amanda's, this is Lynn. I also see issues with when they go to the crosswalk, they're gonna be going with those bikes down the sidewalks. And people go through the market and walk down the sidewalk to go into the restaurants, into the stores. It's gonna create a lot of congestion. And then you've got those tables and chairs that are on the sidewalks, and the triangle signs out on the sidewalks, and the bikes out on the sidewalks in front of the bike shop. So you might wanna think of having those sidewalks like, you can't park there on Saturdays, maybe you have the sidewalks cleared up for Saturdays.
I'm not following when you say you
Sunrise
can't
has
park there on
tables and
Saturdays.
chairs. Thai restaurant has tables and chairs.
Yeah.
The bike shop has like 6 or 7 bikes out there every single day. And that's supposed to be ADA.
I just had a conversation with the bike shop the other day.
Okay, good. So that would be one concern I'd have. Maybe on Saturdays, they can't put their tables and chairs out until after the market closes. Because you're gonna have a lot of people walking, they all walk, they come in at one end, walk through, and a lot of times they walk, you don't have the 2 stores there right now, but if the 2 stores were there, it would be creating a lot. It's just something to think about. The other question, 2 questions I have is, will you please check Frank's house and see if there's a sign that still says bike parking that points to his house,
Oh,
and get that off?
I will take a look.
Because they will all put their bikes against his house, and I don't think that's fair.
Oh, I think the bike park, which we didn't put there, but there was a bike parking sign there, I think at one point for the Agora, and it had an arrow, but
But
people
it
were
meant
probably
to go to
ignoring
the
the arrow.
park, but it didn't explain that, so everybody would
Oh.
park the bikes against Frank's house.
Gotcha.
So if we're gonna do this tent, let's see if we can get rid of that sign.
Of course.
And then one more question, are we gonna have a location done on that lot before we put the tent stakes in?
Oh, utility locates, yes.
Okay, great. After the last fiasco, I thought that might be a good idea. Okay, does anybody else have anything else? May I have a motion, please?
I'd like to make a motion.
I need public comment here.
Oh, public comment, I'm sorry. This is just our little personal thing here. I'll get it together. Anybody have any comments to make on the bike tent? No?
I have no raised hands.
Public comment after Zoom.
I have no raised hands.
Thank you. Now, may I have a motion, please?
I'd like to, say one thing first. I think that, when Amanda and Lynn was talking about in regards to, the sidewalks being open to the public and stuff in the middle of the sidewalks, I think that that's something that can be sorted out. I don't think that, I think it's also a good spot to have a spot for people to put their bikes, because then they're not laying all over the sidewalk. So I'd like to make a motion to approve the temporary use permit for the summer bike parking at 171 and 191 Main Street.
Second.
Motion by Michael, second by Jeff. May I have a roll call vote, please?
Do I vote?
Can he vote tonight? No, you're all here.
Michael, aye.
We'll get this real cleared up here tonight. Lynn, aye.
So I would, because I mean, but we're voting it in exactly as is, without a fence, without
You would like to do
vegetation.
conditions.
Correct.
We can discuss it. We need a second to vote first. Well, we have, Michael,
I
need a second.
Jeff said.
I seconded it.
Okay, so now we can go to discussion.
I would like conditions that there is a fence blocking the sidewalk so that we don't have anybody infringing on the sidewalk for pedestrians. I would like notice that there's proper revegetation, because that area is going to get destroyed. Because there's
Oh, yeah.
it's a park right now. People,
No,
well, it's not a park. People sit there all the time and.
oh, they do.
They do.
But it's not a park, but
It's a nice green space.
Yeah.
I have this thought. What if we directed them to go back down Eagle Street behind the 100 block, come up Toledo, and ask if they could use that path between Toledo to the market and go in on the back way?
That can be an option for sure. I think we can do multiple directionals and wayfinding and try to
'Cause that would
avoid.
take them off that sidewalk on that street
Anything to take
completely,
them off that street.
on both sides.
Yeah.
Madam Chair, when you guys are done deliberating, I'd like to comment on the proposed condition.
Yeah.
I also, sorry if I can, I don't want to mess up the process here of this, but we hope that people will use the bike parking, obviously, but I also don't expect this to like dramatically suddenly increase, like, that we're going to have tenfold the number of bikes on the, coming down the sidewalk that we had before. So I don't expect the congestion issue to be like significantly compounded, but I get all your points and I think they're important. So I'm adding all these notes and we can definitely
The other
add these
thing
conditions.
is a lot of them didn't come down the sidewalk, they came down the street. There's a difference.
Right.
And this might create.
Some people are gonna ride their.
I like to chime back in.
Oh, hold on, okay.
I think that, it's pretty hard to control people. A lot of people pretty much, give them hints and this and that are great, but, people still don't cross the crosswalks and this and that. I think that, it's technically all the ideas are good ideas, but I don't know. I think that I don't feel that personally that we need a lot of conditions on this, because I'd like to think that us as a town are good stewards to do the best that we can and go from there. That's just my opinion. But I like your ideas, but I don't know if we have to give a condition.
Okay, so.
I think,
Then I'll just.
I think a few requests would be accepted. I mean, I kind of agree with that. I had a store there for 14 years. I know what's gonna happen. And I don't think a few minor things, I think the best would be is if we could direct them down Eagle Street the back way over to Toledo and go in the back. That would take them completely off of Main Street. And it wouldn't create a lot of extra traffic there. And it would keep those parking spots open too, without any issues. But that's up to there. Anybody else?
I'm kind of with Mike a little bit. The ideas are great. I like the fencing, the revegetation, and the idea of signing for traffic around Eagle River Street. I like that idea. Outside of that, I think we're trying to micromanage too much and let it go.
Jeff?
You're gonna say aye.
No, you can discuss though. Yeah.
I don't have anything to add.
Okay, Scott?
Okay, so we have a motion on the table. We have a second. You've deliberated. And what I would encourage you to do, if there is concurrence or support for a condition, could also be crafted as a recommendation as well. So if there's a condition that you want to require revegetation, I suggest that you consider reframing that to allow for end of summer review if in fact there's significant damage to the grass area as viewed by staff. Then there's a provision for a revegetation plan or something like that. So putting that discretion at staff level, that might be one way to handle it rather than just requiring it. We don't know if it's actually going to be needed.
That's fine.
So good suggestion. If you want to make that a condition and amend your motion, then that's how I would craft it.
So does Michael have to do that or can Amanda do that?
Michael can do that to,
Because it's your motion.
I still make a motion to approve it with the recommendations
Yes.
from Amanda in regards to looking into signage, potential fencing and revegetation as needed.
I agree. So, Jeff, would you like to
Second?
second?
Sure.
Motion amended from Michael, second by Jeff. May I have a roll call vote, please?
Michael, aye.
Lynn, aye.
Amanda, aye.
They're all right.
Jeff, aye.
Okay, thank you.
great, good job.
Thanks, Cindy.
Thanks, Scott.
Okay, next we have 1014 Two Elk Lane exterior modifications. Who's taking that one tonight? Madison.
So this is fairly straightforward, I feel. It's relatively small modification. They're enclosing about 100 square feet of their deck. So while the roof line is changing to cover this enclosure, not much else on the site is affected. They'll be using the same or similar materials to what is already there, so visually this will not look all that different. I have the owner and I think people from his architecture firm online if you have any questions.
Okay. Anybody have any questions of staff? Would the owner like to make any presentation? No?
We would be happy to. I'm the architect, Kevin Stevenson.
Please give us your address also, Kevin.
Sure, 620 Ivy Street, Denver, Colorado, 80220. And we are the architects for this, what is a very small change to an existing half of a duplex condo at 1014 Two Elk Lane. This is a 2019 build, so relatively recent construction, and the existing deck, which looks out onto Highway 24, is an underutilized space given its orientation. So the owners would like to enclose that to capture a better dining room and a small office space. So it's on the second floor, doesn't change anything on the footprint. There's a slight modification to the roof to capture that. We are using all matching materials and details. So to the most, it probably would be difficult to see the difference between the before and after. So pretty simple. And we do have the owners online and our general contractor as well, if any questions come up for any of them.
Okay, let's start at this end. Jeff?
I don't have anything to ask. I live down there and I see this, walk my dogs down there. I think the northeast elevation looks better with what's proposed than even what's there now. I think it's going to look great. And I really agree with you. I don't think there's going to be I don't think anybody's going to be the wiser when it's all done. It's going to just blend right in and look the same. So I don't have any problems with it. I think it's a good idea and it'll look just fine.
Daryl?
Yeah, I'm same as Jeff. I'm right in the neighborhood there. Go past the place every Tuesdays and Thursdays for sure. I like the look. It will be fine. Great.
Amanda?
I have no questions this time.
Oh, okay.
No.
I really
Michael?
like it.
I don't have any questions.
Eric?
I don't have any questions, it's just already on existing floor, so yeah. Seems like a.
Yeah, that's already there. I don't have any questions either, so we'll open it to public comment. Is there anybody in the public who would like to say anything? Madison, is there anybody on Zoom?
I have no raised hands on Zoom.
Okay, with that, we'll close public comment. Therefore, I will take a motion, please.
I'll make a motion to approve 1014 Two Elk Lane modifications as presented.
I second that motion.
Motion by Jeff, second by Amanda. Is there any other further discussion?
No.
May I have a roll call vote, please, Jeff?
Jeff, aye.
Daryl, aye.
Amanda, I.
Lynn, aye.
Michael, aye.
One down, 3 to go. 2 down, 3 to go.
Congratulations. Good luck.
Thank you. Thank you to the commission.
Here's a new space.
Next is 0036 Silver Star Trail, new single-family residence in Minturn North. Madison?
So this is the first of the Minturn North DRB applications. Just that everybody heads up, this is the first of 12 that we are currently working on. This is a 3-bedroom, 3,300 roughly square foot, single family home that's measured to the midpoint of the roof at 27 feet, 11 1/4 inches. So they will have to be very careful when building that they don't go over that 28-foot height limit. Parking is fine with 3 off-street spaces, 2 of which are provided in the garage, which is allowed per the approved PUD guide. All setbacks are respected and the proposal is under the allowable lot and impervious coverage. They have more snow storage than is required by the code at 285 square feet. Staff has identified no issues and recommends approval of the plans.
Okay, is there anybody presenting for them? Rick?
Rick Hermes with Minturn North. Not really presenting anything, but I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. This is one of 3 this evening, I believe, yeah.
We'll start with you, Eric. Do you have any questions on it?
So this is the initial house in Minturn North, or our first plan. No, I think it goes good with the wildlife and it goes good with the scenery. I don't have any other questions.
Michael?
I think that it, the house and everything looks good. I think that, Madison's concern with, not concerned, but pointing out the height. I think that we have, a bunch of codes in place that require a lot of ILCs to tell you if you're, as long as your height and everything is good. So I don't have any issues with it.
No, I don't know that.
I actually don't have any questions either on this one.
I just have the concern with the height. A dirt clod could throw that off. It's pretty tight.
Hey, Daryl.
Yep.
I'm sorry.
Hold on.
I don't know if Daryl's aware of our ILC things that we just passed, so they get ILCs that verify the height before they continue
Yeah.
the process.
Okay.
Just to say that.
Okay, but I just wanted to
Absolutely.
voice my concern about the height.
Oh, I don't disagree with you.
Okay.
I don't disagree at all.
Okay.
I don't disagree. I didn't mean to think I was disagreeing.
I think it looks great. I like the look of the house. I don't have any problems with that at all. I think just maybe because this is the first of a bunch that are coming through on this, and with the level of interest that the town has had over the past bunch of years with Minturn North, obviously there's going to be some eyes on these first group of houses that go up, and I think getting off to a good start is smart for all of us. So that being said, I think just as a matter of a suggestion, not any kind of a condition, but I think just as we're reviewing these plans, I think it would be smart for Rick and you guys to show somewhere on one of these elevations anyway, maybe just illustrate where the most restrictive point is at which you're going to measure the height on the ILC so that we could see it and not have to do a bunch of math on the elevations to say, okay, here's where the developer is saying the midpoint is being measured from, because especially on a lot of these lots, they're not flat. So as I understand the letter of the code, it is always the most restrictive point at which it will be measured from. And so obviously we're relying on an ILC as the town to come in and say, it's been verified. Okay, well, great. We just don't want to have a situation where someone from the public is questioning that for whatever reason, because, I just think to be on the safe side, and let's get off on the right foot with everybody, that I don't think it's going to be any big deal, because none of these houses that we're reviewing today are 3 stories tall or pushing the limits with an extra space, 2.5 stories or something. But I just think that there's a lot of eyes on Taylor Street probably that are waiting to throw you under the bus for whatever reason.
There is a whole page dedicated to the calculation, so it is in there.
Okay.
It's pretty clear.
Okay. So just, that being said, I think there's just some matters of standardizing, I guess, how we're reviewing these, especially in the interest of moving things along and making sure that, I see it on page BH1 where it's shown and it's measured from the front. So I'm assuming just from that illustration, but it's also measured on the back, wherever that most restrictive point is looks to be the front. So, and that's probably going to be, in most cases, some finished sidewalk or some finished driveway at that point. So it'll be very easy to verify versus in the yard where there's a clump of dirt.
Yeah.
So that being said, I think the house looks great. I like it, and I don't have any problems.
Can I have one more thing? Sure. So the other thing, to Jeff's point on just, laying the, making sure that we're going forward on positive feet. So like in the perspectives on like page 53, where we can see the neighbor house kind of and the way it looks as the community kind of flows. So it's like showing the color. If those colors change, like as we go down the process, so like if one house changes and then the next house, I would expect us to see the actual colors in these going forward so that we can get a good sense of what the community looks like, from the outside looking in, because that was another kind of community feedback we had heard pretty consistently.
There's no,
We
we
don't,
do nothing about color.
we don't regulate
No,
color.
so
You just
Right.
want it to be presented properly.
presented properly, thank you, thank you.
We do, can I add anything?
I was gonna say, what about the HO or the PO or HOA? Do they say anything about color?
It's all the town design review board. We had design guidelines, if you remember in the beginning.
Right.
Those were requested to be removed, so there are no guidelines from our side. We are allowing every owner to select their own colors. And they're very much involved in the architecture and all the modifications. Otherwise, we would have submitted 20-something right now. So we're going through all those modifications, and they're all individualizing their homes, including the colors, exterior materials, all those things.
It's more just making sure that these plans are accurate when they come through, so as,
Well, hello.
just the way they come through, like if there's
How you
changes.
doing tonight?
State your name.
And your address, please.
And
Hi, Elby. I'm one who likes, I know we have no color. We do not, we say we like it, but that, beyond that, we don't anything. But I do understand what Amanda says, so that if this house were to come back in, we would see this house being the color and the side, you know, just so that the package show it properly. That's all she's.
If we know that information at the time, we can add it.
Right,
What we're being cautious about, and making sure we're showing you what we know it to
what
be
you know it to
today.
be.
So
And I
we
like
misrepresent something there that somebody might change.
I like Eric liked the color of the house because it blends into Mother Nature, so.
And I can tell you, this is the lot next door to that house, and
Hi
it's a-
there, welcome.
these are the other neighbors you see on lot 6. So, and they're all different. We worked hard at that, so we can't dictate it either. So, originally we thought we're here 6 color choices, maybe they can make something with that, but ultimately it just came down to look, send us photos of what you like and we'll match that. So that's kind of where we are.
Okay, we can open, oh, wait a minute, Jeff?
I do have one more question, just as, again, protocol, because the disclaimer that's on all these plans that talks about the right to change things, it seems like it's kind of in, if you guys, if the developer, or the builder wants to change things, it's at your discretion to change things. I just wonder how that language reads and applies to the PUD guide as well as town code.
Is that
How
on the renderings, Jeff?
It's on.
Pardon me?
Yeah, on the renderings? We can have that removed.
Well, I mean, it's on pretty much everything.
It's on the architectural plans.
Yeah, it's sort of everywhere, and when I see stuff like that, I get it, but I also wonder how it applies to us as a board and how much leeway the PUD guide gives you and gives your owners to change things after we've approved something. Where do we draw the line?
I don't think the PUD guide really addresses this at all. This is, as Rick mentioned, there's no individual design review board within the HOA. It's the town. So that's something we want to talk to Planning Commission about at the end of this meeting tonight, is if there are modifications along the way, minor changes to windows, whatever. We don't regulate color, so I'm not going to count that. What's our latitude as staff to take those in, keep a record of them, and not necessarily bring minor stuff back to this board unless it's changing roof forms and things like that. So you're preempting a discussion we wanted to have with you. So in that sense, I guess my answer is this can say whatever it wants. We still have a town code, and they're still part of that process. If there are changes and they're not approved, we have a process for that, right? Does that make sense? I share your.
I get that. I just wonder if this disclaimer somehow protects anybody from that. If it's an after the fact, somebody finds something in the field, the house gets changed in some way, nobody catches it till a year or two down the road, and all of a sudden somebody calls it up and
Town
and
still
it's
has jurisdiction.
okay.
We're covered.
I mean, I know we're kind of lacking in the code enforcement department,
Maybe not for long.
so it's just kind of it's
If I could just add, we'll take a look at that before it goes to building permit. We're not hung up on that. I think it was very early on, we were doing the marketing and trying to figure out, you know, if we needed to make a modification one way or another to meet code, to make sure we can make those modifications. So we'll revisit that,
okay.
see if we can clean it up.
Okay.
Do you have a comment, or do you just have anything else?
You can do public comment, and I just wanted to make one comment after that.
Is there anybody in the audience who would like to say anything? No? Zoom?
I have no raised hands.
With that, I'll close public comment. Would anybody like to raise a motion?
I just have one thing to say.
Oh, I'm sorry, Scott wanted
It's
to.
okay.
I'm sorry.
First of all, I want to say Madison's done a great job of reviewing everything in front of you tonight, and that is a result of months worth of meetings with the applicant to prepare us for this continual stream of homes that we're going to be reviewing, and getting a system down, quite frankly, making sure that things like building height calculation and how the PUD is going to be interpreted and how it's going to be applied to each one of these plans. That was a lot of pre-work to get to this point. And I think it's reflected in the fact that staff and even our town engineer who loves to find stuff didn't find a whole lot wrong with these plans. So it was a fairly easy review for each one of these. I think I anticipate that as we move forward. Rick and his team do a great job. So, you know, we're all kind of setting ourselves up for success. But we do need to talk about something else that I think we should anticipate with these, because each one of them is kind of becoming custom. That's awesome. If it results in more vibrant colors, because that was a concern during the public hearings, it's something that we've put in each one of our review letters to the applicant. Madison has put that in each one of her letters, saying we encourage you to think about different color palettes, or, you know, vibrant colors around the trim or whatever, right? But we can't make that a condition because we don't regulate color. I think we're on a good path here to have, you know, pretty smooth reviews for most of these things. That does not mean that we're not going to have individual issues with individual lots. There are some really steep, challenging lots here, but so far so good. I just wanted to give that context. We've spent weeks and months working up to getting some good submittals and having a good chain of communication between Rick and his team and our staff. So that gives me.
Can I give you two examples just to put in perspective? You know, we have a lot of clients that would like to have a very customized door. It's their door. Either they've selected it from somewhere, or maybe it's an antique or whatever it might be. And we're showing a door. In most cases, this is what they've approved. But if they find something cool and interesting, or a color, we want to incorporate that. But we don't want to waste your time coming back here with a different door style in the same architecture. That's the one example. The other example is, as we have gone through this with Xcel Energy, as an example, they typically, we would enclose the electrical panels. Now they won't let us do that. They want us to add, you know, cover on the outside. So we're having to add a little shed roof or a cable form over the top of it. And we don't want to, again, waste your time with something we're having to do for the permitting process that doesn't impact the architecture, because we don't want to impact the architecture that's approved either. But I think there are some minor changes that staff, you know, they can work through without all the submittals and the notifications and things that we have to do to get on the meeting agenda. Because we have to notify all the surrounding property owners with certified mail on every submittal. So it's a lengthy process on our side.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, as you consider a motion, I just remind you to, if you're going to make a motion, try to reference the staff report in the findings, or at least reference the fact that it does or does not meet the town's findings and criteria.
Anybody ready to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve 36 Silver Star Trail as it meets the findings presented in the staff report. And that's it.
I second that motion.
Is there anybody who would, motion by Jeff, second by Amanda. Is there any further discussion? No. May I have a roll call vote, please?
Jeff,
Michael,
aye.
aye.
Lynn, aye.
Amanda, aye.
Darrell, aye.
You just said aye.
I did.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5 ayes, no nays. Next, we have one down. How many to go?
2 more.
To go.
0095 Miles End Lane, new single-family residence, Ventura North. Madison.
Yes. So this is slightly
Thank you
bigger
for coming.
than
Have fun.
This is slightly bigger than the last one we reviewed. This is a 4-bedroom, 4,700 square foot single family home, which is measured to the midpoint of the roof at 27 feet 6 7/8 inches. So they've got a little bit more wiggle room on this one than the last one. Parking is fine with 4 off-street spaces, 2 of which are provided in the garage, 2 in front, which, as I stated, the last one is allowed via the PUD guide. The plans have an unfinished basement. The main level has 1 bedroom, garage, and living room, and the upper level has the 3 remaining bedrooms. All setbacks are fine, and the proposal is under the allowable lot and impervious coverage. They have more snow storage than is required by the code at 562 square feet. Staff has identified no issues and recommends approvals of the plans.
You did that very well.
Thank you.
Rick?
I have nothing to add. I'm happy to answer any questions. I did notice
Do this.
the square footage includes the garage and the unfinished space. That's total square footage of everything,
Okay,
not just the livable space.
so does anybody, let's start with Jeff.
I don't have any problems with it. I like the look of the house and everything seems to check out. So I think Madison did a great job and it meets the findings.
I have no problem at all. It looks great.
I have no problem either.
Amanda's being very quiet.
Speechless.
Cindy,
I'm teasing. Michael?
I think everything looks good.
I like the look, it meets all the specifications.
I do too. It's so nice when people come in and follow our code. It makes it so simple.
Did a lot.
no variances.
No variances, none of this, none of that. So thank you for doing that.
You can thank Don. This is Don Eggers, our architect, by the
Hi,
way.
Don. Thank you, Don.
Don's here because I may not be at every single meeting, so in my absence, he'll be here, or be on Zoom, one or the other.
Great. So next, we'll open to public comment. Is there anybody in the audience? There is not. Madison, Zoom?
I have no raised hands.
Nobody on Zoom. Does anybody have a motion?
I'd like to make a motion. I'd like to make, believe I'm on the right one.
This is gonna be the problem.
Hold on, where we
There.
at?
95 miles in.
95, right?
Yes.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the final plans for 0095 Miles End Lane, generally complied with or exceed the applicable provisions or minimum standards of Chapter 16 in the Town Minturn Design Standards Appendix B of the Minturn Town Code.
Gold
Yeah.
star, Michael.
Wow.
Yeah.
Nice to
Can
one
we
up
write
me.
that down? I second the motion.
Motion by Michael, second by Amanda. Is there any further conversation? No? Okay. May I have a roll call vote, please?
Michael, aye.
Lynn, aye.
Amanda, I.
Darrell, aye.
Jeff, I.
5 yeas, no nos. Thank you. Next, we have 0196 Miles in Lane. Madison.
It's me again.
Hi
So this is an even larger one than the last one. 4-bedroom, about 5,300 square foot, single family home. Measured to the midpoint of the roof at 27 feet 10 3/4 inches. Parking is fine with 4 off-street spaces, 2 in the garage, 2 in front, as stated, allowed by the PUD guide. Plans show the entry level with 1 bedroom, garage, and entertainment lounge, and the upper level has the 3 remaining bedrooms and primary living area. All setbacks are respected by the finished project, and the proposal is under the allowable lot and impervious coverage. They have more snow storage than is required by the code at 562 square feet. Due to the proximity of Game Creek, staff and the town engineer recommend providing the layback distance needed and potential disturbance between the proposed MSE wall and the Game Creek live stream setback area, as well as showing the limits of the debris flow area on the site plan. There is a reason why I said all setbacks are respected by the finished project, as we don't quite know how the construction of that MSE wall in the back will impact the live stream setback as it's being constructed.
Rick, to you.
I think Don can answer that question better than I can, because he's been working with our engineer on it.
So, for your record, it's Don Eggers. I'm with Eggers Architecture. My address is, P.O. Box 798 in Kremling, 80459. So with the MSE retaining wall, it's the back of the lot. The back of that wall is 1 foot off of the property line. And we've gone to MSE walls back there because they are a 4 foot by 2 foot by 2 foot concrete precast wall. and they only have a 1-inch adder per every 2 feet of height. And additionally, behind those, we're only required to have a foot of gravel fill. So our plan is to vertically cut at that property line to allow us for the 1 foot of gravel fill and then have the retaining wall. There may potentially be more when we get into soils, but it's not gonna get much beyond. If you want to, at a 1-to-1 and a 6-foot wall, it'd be a 6-foot layback for that area. As far as the debris flow goes, we'll have that on the permit set of drawings, but it winds in and out of the 100-year floodplain within about 4 to 6 feet of that line. So it's well 30 feet beyond any of the construction that's proposed.
The bottom line is, as the condition is written, it's acceptable. We'll show that on the permit set, so you'll see it on there.
Okay.
And technically, what's going on there is, in order to put the foundations in, we're actually putting in a shotcrete wall first, where the homes go, and that wall is behind. So there's, that's for safety purposes, because the amount of space we need for anyone working on a foundation not to have something collapse on them. So
Does
that's
everyone
not-
know what a shotcrete wall?
No.
No.
Can you guys explain
It's
that?
it's pinned, so when they excavate, they literally shoot concrete onto a wall, onto the dirt.
Okay.
And they pin it, so when we get down to build the foundation, if there's a cut, we
Rods.
can have a steeper cut, so that it's not gonna collapse on someone working in that area. It's a OSHA.
You see it a lot on highway constructions where they're doing vertical walls. They actually drill rods into the hillside and then it, with a hollow rod, and it balloons at the end. So they inject concrete into it, so it forms a balloon at the end of this rod. And then they put up a wire mesh over it and then spray concrete on it to tie it all together. So,
And it remains.
Yeah, it's just a soil stabilization is all it is. You won't see that at all, it'll be buried. So you have the main floor of the house, the backyard, and then you have in the case of lot 6, 4-foot wall. It's an MSE wall, so a wall that's that tall. And that's why you don't need a big layback. You're gonna cut it a foot behind that wall, backfill it with gravel, and then build the wall in front of it. So you're not cutting way into the hillside, because there's no need for us to do that. But we'll show the limits of disturbance so everybody can see it at the permit, the way it's written in the condition.
Okay. Now, we're gonna start with Eric. Do you have any thoughts or questions or concerns?
Come back to me.
Come back to you.
Well, I mean, if I,
Oh,
let me just make one, yeah.
Michael.
I understand what he's talking about with the shotcrete wall and everything, and so I'm good.
Amanda?
So the only question I have, which is this because I am not a builder, the one that sits on this. So, you know, there is 7 lots on that street, backing up to that creek. Do you do this shotcrete per house, or is it, do you have to do something for the whole
It's only
section?
on lots 5, 6, and 7, and it varies in height, and it's just a protective measure
Okay,
that you'll never see. You'll see it whenever we're putting the foundation in, but it gets backfilled,
okay,
so you won't see it at all.
okay. And then, sorry, remind me, because I think we had this discussion on the setbacks on that creek, they're different than Eagle River, right?
Yeah.
Correct.
Well, no, they're 30 feet, which is the same live stream setback that applies to the
Live stream,
Eagle
okay.
River or Grouse Creek or any other creek in town.
Okay,
Yep.
okay,
And that is on the site plan.
okay, yeah. No additional questions?
Just new to the board here. You guys, it sounds like you guys did discuss the floodplain. And that is okay.
Yeah, we spent considerable time during the PUD approval process discussing Game Creek and the floodplain, the live stream setback, and mud flow or debris flow, and the mitigation of putting a berm in between the river setback and the lots
Oh,
to
okay.
mitigate any potential mud flow down
Oh,
that creek.
Yeah, I don't see the burn because of pretty small picture.
Yeah,
Okay.
I don't think it's behind this particular lot. That's why you don't see it on there.
Oh, oh. Okay. No, I don't have anything else.
Jeff?
No, I mean, this one is, this lot in particular is probably the closest to the 30-foot live stream setback. So I would say this is probably one of the most challenging lots to get it right. So it's, I guess in one hand, it's good that you're starting out with one of the more difficult ones on that row. But to Amanda's point, I'm assuming that that MSC wall, you're gonna build all the way down as far as you need to build it before any foundations are put in, correct?
That's right. Well, you'll see lots 5 and 7 at the next go around. So 5, 6, and 7 are all kind of in the one street that's uphill there.
And then because this application references the civil drawings that Jeff Spinell has been, and you guys have been back and forth on, I did notice that some of those MSC walls are over 4 feet tall. So there's some that are 6 feet tall. And I would assume that those are engineered and there's engineering to support all of that. And then does he have to fence it to keep people from falling off that in the backyard because it's over 4 feet?
Well, the PUD doesn't allow access back there.
No, but I'm just saying, even as a homeowner with a small child, if they fell off the 6-foot MSC wall,
You're going the other way.
I am.
It's 6 foot up.
It's retaining the
From
other
the
way.
yard, you're going up to the Game Creek.
Gotcha.
Oh, I see your question.
I'm looking at it the other way.
So you're backfilling into the yard.
Yeah, they're shotcreting towards Game Creek, backfilling it, and then putting the walls.
It's in a cut.
Gotcha. Okay.
It kind of tapers lot 5 and works its way up. Lot 7 has more retaining, but that retaining actually goes on to tract B,
Yep.
which is, there's just more room between the setback there.
Yep. Okay. So other than that, I'm good.
Okay, public comment. Is there anybody in the audience who would like to speak? There is not. Is there anybody on Zoom?
I have no raised hands.
With that, we'll close public comment. And I will take a motion. Does anybody have one?
I'd like to make a motion to approve the final plans for 0196 Miles End Lane with the following recommended conditions. The applicant shall provide details on the site plan regarding the layback distance needed and potential disturbance between the proposed MSC wall and the Game Creek live stream setback area, as well as showing the limits of debris flow area on the site prior to or concurrent with building permit application.
May I have a second?
Second.
Motion by Michael, second by Jeff. Is there any further discussion? No. May I have a roll? Okay, you looked at me like a maybe. Roll call vote, please.
Michael, aye.
Lynn, aye.
Amanda, aye.
Daryl, aye.
Jeff, aye.
Motion by Michael, second by Jeff. 5 yeas, no nays.
Thank
I
you.
can't believe we
Thank
did
you.
this.
And then we
Madison.
can go back to 6:30 and then I'm out like.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, everybody, and
This is the
congratulations.
smallest of the
Congratulations.
See you in 2 weeks.
Well, you're,
Yes. Have a good one. Yes, this is the smallest batch. This is the third 3. The second batch was 4. The third batch has been 5. So it will progressively get
Long.
I did that last one with the deck on top
yeah,
of the
but you're doing a
garage.
good job.
So
Like,
cool.
it's,
Reminds
Okay,
me of
I
my
assume
deck.
this
It
is
makes
a
our
gem
job
for you,
easier.
Sarsa.
I am.
So I'm going to request a 5-minute recess before we start that. Okay? I'll reopen the, what is today's date? 12th?
see, senor.
June 12th Planning and Zoning Commission meeting.
Pass them down. Take one, pass it on.
Lynn, I have information about the fire.
Okay, we'll get it language. Yeah, isn't that,
Especially with the lead belt going on.
Planning Commission comments on number 11.
11.
We got a while yet.
Okay.
Welcome, welcome. Just two, right? Hi,
Hi,
welcome.
thank you. Thank you for having me.
Okay. Would you like to introduce yourself and get us rolling?
Sure, I'd be happy to.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you all for having me out. Good to see you. By way of introduction, my name's Sam Light, and I am Deputy Executive Director and General Counsel for an outfit called SURSA. That's an acronym, which stands for the Colorado Intergovernmental Risk Sharing Agency. Phew, which is kind of a mouthful, right? So that's why we call it SURSA. So we're the town's property and casualty insurance provider. We provide the insurance, everything from insuring the town buildings and the town vehicles, property insurance, all the way to covering, providing liability insurance. It helps cover, the claim of the slip and fall outside of town hall. And we even provide liability insurance for elected and appointed officials like yourselves. That's good news, right? Good to know you've got some insurance coverage. It helps protect you in doing this job. Liability, public official liability is actually not the subject of my training tonight, but if you have questions about that, I'm happy to tell you how your insurance works and how your protections work, but we don't need to worry about that stuff, right? Knock on wood. What I'm here to talk about this evening is training around quasi judicial best practices for you all as the Planning Commission. So just a little bit more about SURSA to let you know who we are. So we're not a commercial insurance company. We're a public entity self-insurance pool organized under Colorado statute. So our only members, our only insurers, our only book of business is insuring Colorado cities and towns and affiliated entities like housing authorities or renewal authorities. We've got about 290 members. That's about 90% of the municipalities around the state. That's essentially all of the small to mid-size, almost all of the mid-size to smaller, large cities, but not the real big ones like the Denvers and the Lakewoods and the Auroras and the Colorado Springs. Those would be kind of too big anyway for the pooling concept. A pooling concept is we're owned by our insurers. And so we don't have a profit motive. We don't have shareholders. We have members who are our cities and towns who own SURSA as an entity. So you can learn more about us at www.sursa.org. So I understand we've got one or two new members to the commission.
Eric is new.
Yep, I'm new.
And even though Daryl says he's new, he's also been our mayor at one time.
All right,
so-
very good, very good. Good to see you. And then we got a couple folks who got a couple of years under their belt. Okay,
And
very
I've been
good.
to one SURSA training years ago up at Colorado Mountain College in Leadville.
Oh, wow.
When I first
yeah.
started.
Yeah.
That's many years ago.
Okay, yeah, that has been a while. We haven't been up to the college for quite a bit. Well, whether you're new, just getting oriented to the job, or whether you've been doing this for a while, I hope you find the training to be either a helpful orientation or a helpful refresher of how you do your work at the Planning Commission. We got a small, informal, collegial group here, so we can take questions as I go through the material. So if you have questions, feel free to ask. Feel free to ask me about anything you'd like. I do have one thing, though. I got two disclaimers. One is, though, I am an attorney. This isn't an attorney-client session, right? So if you've got a question for which you need legal advice related to some issue going on in the here and now, that's for your town attorney to help you with. And then second, I also have a good radar for the live question of the day. I don't think I'm going to have any of those issues going on, but if, sometimes I get these surprise questions where after the question is asked, everyone kind of perks up, and their eyes open wide and they go, this is going to be exciting discussion. Let's see what the SURSA attorney has to say about this. Usually doesn't happen at the Planning Commission level. It usually happens when I'm dealing with elected officials at the governing body level. But if I sense that, I'm going to let you know that that's probably not a question for me. Okay? Let's go to the next slide. So you can go to our website to learn more about us. There's some training materials there that are linked on this slide that might be of interest to you. My marketing department wanted me to remind you that the very last bullet there, I'm going to talk kind of about some liability related principles here this evening, kind of some pretty weighty stuff about actual risks around how you do your job as planning commissioners. But we try to have a sense of humor at Sursa once in a while, right? So the last link is a humorous set of videos that we prepared on these topics. Try to put a little lighthearted spin on it while still trying to convey the message of, hey, what we do in this job, particularly when we attend to people's due process rights, is a very important thing. But the last slide there, the last bullet on the slide points you to some humorous videos that we have on the topic as well.
Very entertaining. I watched it.
Oh, did you? Okay, good. I never thought I don't know how I got voluntold to do
I
that.
was gonna get your autograph.
And we recruited a comedian, so he's the one that makes it funny. I'm just doing the narrative. All right, let's go to the next slide. There's just a little bit more about Sursa for you, and then let's go to the next slide. Madison, thanks very much. All right, we're going to talk about quasi-judicial decision-making, but before I do that, I just want to start at this kind of high level. The job of the Planning and Zoning Commission, we get to make, along with the town board, we get to make decisions affecting people's individual property and individual property rights, right? That's pretty amazing, isn't it? You got 7 people on the town board and 5 people on the Planning Commission plus an alternate. I don't know what your current population is, but whatever that population is, think about it, we got 12 people in the community that have the right to decide, right? Whether someone can subdivide their land, right? Whether they can rezone their land, whether they can proceed with their final site plan for their residential home, like we just talked about on the last couple items on your agenda. That's a pretty awesome power, right? And you want that power, right? We don't want the county telling us how to make land use decisions. We don't want the state. That became pretty evident, right, the last couple of years with some of the initiatives by the state legislature to intrude into the area of local government land use planning. So we want that power, right? But with that power, there's kind of this grand bargain, right? That if we want that power, what we have to provide in exchange is make sure that we're honoring people's due process rights, right? And that's an individual and collective responsibility of the Planning Commission, the town board, and of course your town staff is there to help support you to make sure we're honoring our end of the grand bargain. Okay, let's go. Let's stay on the slide for a second. You've all heard that phrase quasi-judicial, right? Yeah, it's when you sign up for the Planning Commission, you probably knew that that's kind of the heavy lift of the job, right? That it's kind of unique. There's a lot of boards and commissions at the local government level that are kind of like primarily policy-making boards, right? And they get to make policies and they get to legislate or have input on legislation. You get to do a little bit of that, but the big lift a lot of the time is this quasi-judicial role to the citizens, particularly ones who may misperceive that you're kind of the same as legislators. This idea of being a quasi-judicial decision maker is kind of a relatively little known aspect of what local governments do, but it's super important. And as we're going to talk about tonight, the rules that apply to quasi-judicial decision making are much, much different than the rules that apply to legislative decision making, right? In terms of what the Planning Commission does, you probably recognize there's probably something in your home rule charter that talks about the creation of the Planning Commission. And there's an ordinance that talks about what your job responsibilities are as the Planning Commission, but they kind of fall into 2 baskets. Some of the times the Planning Commission deals with big picture stuff, right? Stuff like who's primarily responsible for developing the comprehensive plan for the town?
Community plan?
Planning. Yeah, community plan or comprehensive plan, some people call it master plan, right? And you may have several components to that, right? And that's sort of making policy around land use, right? So that's some of the work you do. And then sometimes once in a while, heaven tell me that they didn't do this, but like when you first signed up to the job, did they give you this book, this huge book? The Land Development Code?
I still have it. It's about
Yeah,
the
they don't do it anymore, but you
French.
still have hundreds of pages of the zoning code and the development code, right? Once in a while, as a policymaking body, you'll have input on updating those rules and regulations, right? That's kind of a legislative task too, right? But at other times, you're making decisions. By the way, when you do the comp plan and you work on the general updates to the development regulations. You're probably making recommendations to the town board, right? And then the town board is the group, town council is the group that makes the final decision on adoption of the town plan or the adoption of the ordinance that updates the zoning standards, subdivision rules, whatever they may be. That's kind of a legislative activity, but the other part of the job for all these applications that come in front of you is when you get to make decisions that affect the individual rights of individual property owners. People coming in front of you as a planning commission for either your decision or your recommendation. Just using what was on your agenda tonight, was that decision that you just made on that housing application, is that the final step?
It technically goes to council on consent, so
Okay.
council has the option to call it up.
Okay, so that's almost the final step. All right, yep, so whether you make, but other things, maybe you make a recommendation, right? Like a preliminary or final planned unit development plan, you'll make a recommendation to council, right? So in this role, right, individuals are coming to you for your recommendation or decision on something concerning their property, right? And when you're doing that, you're acting in a quasi-judicial capacity. Let's go to the next slide. I think before I unpackage quasi-judicial a little bit more, I just want to break down like this idea, this notion of the difference. Because I think illustrating what legislative activity is shows you the distinction and the importance of conducting ourselves differently when we're dealing with applications that involve property rights. So, the legislative stuff is kind of what you see the town council doing when they're wearing that legislator hat, when they're making policy that doesn't affect any specific applicant in the moment. Legislative activity is making general rules that apply to everybody sometime in the future, don't apply to anybody in particular at this point in time. Some examples. Maybe the issue was floated, hey, maybe planning commission and town council, let's go into the zoning code and talk about whether we want to have an ordinance that allows or disallows food trucks. There's no specific applicant yet, right? We're just making general rules, right? Or maybe we want to, which guidelines just apply to the ones that we just looked at? Were those 100-block design guidelines or?
Just general design guidelines.
General residential design guidelines, yeah. Maybe the issue floats up after we deal with a couple of these. Hey, it's been a couple of years since we've updated our design guidelines. Let's update the design guidelines and talk more about architectural articulation and roof design and landscaping. If you do that stuff, that's legislative. Doesn't apply to anybody in particular yet. It's just making general rules. But when we're wearing that hat and when we're, as the planning commission, developing our recommendations to the town council on what to put in those kind of ordinances, we're doing the things that legislators do, right? And legislative activity includes things like, listening to the citizens who contact you in person, right? Investigating the issues yourself, communicating early and often with people, right? Lobbying and being lobbied, working to advance and create a consensus, having your own convictions and prejudgments. If we're just in general talking about a food truck ordinance, right, and you're thinking, what do I individually want to contribute to the planning commission discussion on whether or not we recommend this to the council to allow them or not allow them? Heck, I can research other food truck ordinances in other jurisdictions. I can talk to people out in the community and say, hey, do you like or did not like food trucks? Right? I can vote on the recommendation based on my own personal viewpoint. Hey, I think food trucks are a great idea. I think we ought to recommend an ordinance that allows them, or the exact opposite. So all of that stuff, and all those lobbying and legislative types of activities, those are ultimately in view of voting on a policy-making enactment, right, that will have prospective application to those who later come within the ambit of the enactment, right? So that's legislative activities, okay? Let's go to the next slide. For you all at the planning commission level, your legislative activities probably are things like making a recommendation on or adopting the comprehensive plan, your land use plans, your various sub-area plans, making recommendations on generally applicable updates to the zoning ordinance, to the design guidelines, other legislative regulations, right? That's what's most analogous to being a legislator. We're looking at big picture stuff, right? We're not seeking to make a binding decision that affects a specific individual. But that's half or less than half the job, right? At other times, we as a planning commission are doing things like responding to individual requests for people who come in front of us, right, for decisions affecting their individual property rights. Things like, under your rules, you as a planning commission either make a decision on or make a recommendation on things like a request to subdivide property, request to rezone, request for approval of a final or preliminary development plan, conditional uses, is that what it's called? They come in front of you and then design review applications. In all of those situations, you're not a legislator, you're a judge. You just don't wear a robe. That's not why we call it quasi-judge, but I hate that word because it's such a legalistic word, quasi-judge. But what it really means is you're the ones who are adjudicating. You're the adjudicatory body that gets to listen to the adjudication of these applications and just like a judge, make a decision. So you want to think in terms of, hey, this is our courtroom. We are the judges. All right, let's go to the next slide. All right. So when we get in this quasi-judicial mode, all the activities that I listed in red on the previous slide, right, those things are not appropriate because in this other role, you're not supposed to be acting like a legislator. You're supposed to be acting like a judge. So let's get into the meat and potatoes of what is a quasi-judicial decision. Quasi-judicial decision typically, right, affects property rights at an individual level. The decision is made through a process where we take pre-existing specific legal criteria, our standards, right? And we apply them to the testimony and the evidence concerning the application that's brought forward to us as the Planning Commission at the hearing, not anywhere else, right? And then we have a hearing and there's a decision that's rendered by a fair and impartial decision maker. That's all of you. Sounds pretty judicial, doesn't it? Yeah, pretty interesting, right? Another shorthand way of saying it is we all know what it looks like, right? I don't need, been through this a couple times already. Quasi-judicial decision-making process is characterized by a notice. We give additional notice to the interested parties, right? We have a public hearing and we make a decision based on the record of the hearing by applying pre-existing legal standards. That all sounds pretty judicial, right? So that's process. For those of you who are new, well, no, I'll ask everybody, do you like process? Do you like process? Yeah. Well, we kind of get a bad rap sometimes in local government, right? Because people can say, oh, it's such a long process, it's so difficult, it's so bureaucratic, particularly for quasi-judicial decision-making, but for other aspects of local government work too, process is intentional. And process is there to make sure that we make fair and predictable decisions, that everybody gets a chance to be heard, right? And that we're doing the right thing for the right reason. So you want to embrace and be a champion of the Planning Commission's process. You want to be a champion of good process, irrespective of outcome, even if you're on the the two side of a 3-2 vote on an application. And you always want to commit, as part of good process, to consider every application on its merits alone. That'll serve you very well, okay? There's a nice little nifty legal concept here that illustrates the importance of process. I'm happy to answer liability related questions, but I don't dig too much into it. But I just want to point out how important process is. If somebody's mad about a land use decision that you make, under state law, their only remedy, as long as we've done the right things for the right reasons through the right process, their only remedy is this thing called a 106 challenge. That's a rule of court procedure. And really, when they go to court, right, the only room that they really have to argue is basically twofold. Either your process was flawed or your decision was arbitrary. That standard of being arbitrary is very deferential to you, right? So it's almost like process is more important than substance. And we want it to be that way, right? The job of the district court at the state level, if one of your land use decisions is challenged, is just to look at your process and make sure you properly applied your rules. The district court's not there like in the case of this house. Let's say you approve that, but the neighbor doesn't like it. And so the neighbor sues, challenges your approval. The record's going to show, hey, we approved it based on our design standards and our ordinances. We made a finding to that effect. That was just encouraged that you were made a finding, right? And the judge is gonna look at that and say, they followed their rules. It's not the judge's job to say, well, I think that that footprint seems a little large to me as the judge. I don't like it. So I'm gonna that's not the judge's job. The judges are not there to second guess the substance of what you decide. They're there to police procedure and make sure that everyone's rights are handled appropriately, okay? So just recognize that process is as important, if not more important than substance. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so as the planning commission and town council as well, right, the idea of being a quasi-judge does require that we, both as individuals and as a commission, conduct ourselves differently. Legislative type activities don't work for the quasi-judicial decision makers, right? There's a whole set of rules of engagement that apply both before, during, and after quasi-judicial proceedings that you want to commit to adhere to, right? And people sometimes ask me though, well, that's weird. Why can't I approach my job as a planning commissioner kind of like a freewheeling policymaking job? Why can't people come up to me and say, hey, I got a design, I see that design review coming up and I just want you to vote no. And let me talk to you about why you should vote no and things like that, right? The quasi-judicial rules of engagement that we're going to talk about, though they seem sort of counterintuitive, they have a very familiar source, right? US and state constitutions say no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. And that's what it really boils down to, of the millions of decisions and millions of pages written about due process at the local government level, just making sure that we do the things as the quasi-judicial decision makers that judges would do and don't do the things that judges wouldn't do. And that'll keep us in a safe place, okay? So, once in a while, the town attorney, right, or staff's gonna jump in and say, remind you of certain things, and this is why you need to follow this rule, right? What they're trying to do there, right, they're not trying to be obstructive. They're trying to make sure that we only got 12 people who can make these decisions. When they're encouraging you to stay away from certain things or to make sure you do this, they're doing that to help you stay in the game, right? Particularly with respect to what I call ex parte communications that we'll talk about in a minute. But they want you to make sure that you're conducting yourself like a judge so that when we have an application, no one ever stands up at the beginning and says, Madam Chair, before you begin the hearing on this application, I'd like to make an objection because I have evidence that one of the commissioners is biased or engaged in prejudicial communications with the people who are for or against this application, or things like that, right? So just recognize that's what they're doing. They're trying, both we and your town attorney and staff are looking to protect your right and responsibility to be a part of the decision-making process and to ultimately protect the decision that you reach, right? And not following the quasi-judicial rules of engagement can jeopardize both those goals, okay? Now, the rules we're gonna unpackage here in just a minute, they become important from a litigation risk standpoint because, as I said, if we follow the due process requirements and we give people a good process, then really all they're gonna have available is a state law challenge. But if we do things that violate their due process rights under the state and federal constitution, what are they thinking? Civil rights claim. You violated my due process rights under the US Constitution. That has significant consequences because if I, as a claimant and a claimant's attorney, can find a path and find evidence and make allegations that there was a violation of my federal due process rights, now I'm off in the races in federal court filing a federal civil rights claim under Section 1983. And what's my remedy there? Money damages. That district court proceeding that I talked about earlier at the state level, the state judges don't have that right. All they do is look at whether you followed your rules, and if you did, they say you win. If you didn't follow the rules, then they just overturn your decision. They say your decision was arbitrary or capricious, didn't fit within your jurisdiction, and it just gets returned back to you. So there's much more risk in terms of money dollar exposure if we're violating federal due process requirements. Okay, let's go to the next slide. To sum that kind of concept up about what the legal risk is, it's essentially this. If the hearing's been carried out properly and our decision has been issued based on the facts that we heard during the hearing, and we applied the appropriate legal criteria that our decision is likely to withstand state law challenge, and other recourse is likely going to be unavailable to the plaintiff. So as I said earlier, in quasi-judicial matters, in the work that you do, in making those site-specific decisions or recommendations, the procedure by which you arrive at your decision can be more important from a legal and liability standpoint than the actual substance. All right, let's go to the next slide. All right, one other way to look at this in terms of individual conduct, this may sound a little bit unfair, but fair, unfair. Recognize that when judges in our litigation world at CIRSA, by the way, I mentioned, of course, at CIRSA, we deal with getting insurance in place and deal with renewals, but we have this outfit called the claims department on the second floor, right? And they're the ones that help defend against claims, including claims that are covered claims, if they're covered, that arise from land use liability. So when these things get in court, you have to recognize fair or unfair. The judges who actually wear the robes, when they're looking at quasi-judicial matters, they kind of use a lens like they see themselves, right? And they're going to have high expectations, even though we're less formal, right? They're going to say, look, these people, just like me as a district court judge, they're responsible for providing due process to the applicant, right? So they're going to look at it and go, well, did they conduct themselves as planning commissioners the same way I would as a judge if I were deciding this land use case, right? Was I being fair and impartial? Was I staying away from not getting involved in lobbying or being lobbied, right? Staying away from getting involved in communications outside of the hearing, right? So you want to approach this part of the job by thinking like a judge, both with respect to your own personal conduct and your collective conduct as a planning commission, okay? So there's a handout, let's go to the next slide. There's a handout, but let's start talking about some of the behaviors, actual rules of engagement that you want to have in mind in terms of thinking like a judge, okay? Don't make up your mind before the hearing. The food truck ordinance, hey, you can bring your own preconceived notions, but as a judge, you don't want to make up your mind before the hearing. Don't make prejudicial pre-hearing statements. That can be kind of tough sometimes. I don't know what the climate's like here, but if there's an exciting land use application coming up, what's the natural inkling of the newspaper reporter? And I was a newspaper reporter in a former life. What do they want to do? I want to talk to the elected officials in the planning commission and figure out if this thing's going to be approved or denied. You want to hold your cards close to your vest, and just remind that person, hey, as the judge, I don't have anything to say about this right now, but we're going to have a nice hearing about that, and that's when you'll hear us as a planning commission talk about it. This can be tough. Prejudicial pre-hearing statements, you may have your own personal view, like. Maybe you're tired of, I'll give you a real life example. In a former life, I was a municipal attorney, just like you're a municipal attorney, and I had elected appointed officials. They were developing a new corridor, and it was kind of a gateway, Main Street into town. And, nice, beautiful landscape medians and all this, and they thought the vision was mixed-use retail. Of course, once they opened up this corridor, what were the first 3 or 4 applications that they got? Banks. 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 And so by the 3rd or 4th one, I had an elected official, just gratuitously, not in the context of any public hearing, said to the planning staff, I don't want to see any more banks. I'll never vote for another bank. Does that sound like a fair and impartial judge of the next hearing for the final site plan for a bank? No. Right, so make sure we're careful about that. Make sure we don't speak with one side or the other before the hearing. I'm going to talk more about that in a minute. Also, of course, make sure you don't participate in the hearing if you have a financial or other personal interest, right? That's your code of ethics. You have to recuse yourself if you have a conflict of interest. Don't sign any pro or con petitions. In my former life, I was a little surprised once in a while when somebody it was mostly on the no side, but they turned in a petition, and I'd just kind of be thumbing through it. These things don't have, there's no magic weight or credibility to petitions, but I was thumbing through it. I was like, oh, there's a couple of elected and appointed officials who signed this petition. That's not a good look if you're the judge signing. You don't want to do that, right? Don't bring your own decision-making facts to the hearing. Remember, you get to be the judge, right? So you don't want to be a witness or a prosecutor or an advocate or investigator in your own hearing. You want to sit back and let people bring you information? This is a little nuanced and a little tricky. Let me give an example, because you all bring your own experiences. It's not like you can wipe out of your mind what you see in the community, but I'll give you a real life example. So I had a site plan for development. Maybe you're going to have one like this. The crux issue was the traffic. How much traffic is this project going to produce? And is it acceptable? Is it going to meet our traffic standards in our ordinance? And one of my elected officials during the quasi-judicial hearing, during the PUD final plan, very contentious, a lot of people came out, a couple sessions of the public hearing. During one session, he said, well, I got problems with the staff's traffic study because they didn't do any traffic counts during peak hours. So we don't really, and I don't like the applicant's traffic study because I don't think they collected traffic counts over a long enough period of time to get a good sense for just how busy that road is. Right, so that's about all he said that night. Then we came back for a later session of the public hearing, and we picked up the traffic issue again. And he again expressed his concerns about the 2 traffic studies, but then he said, but what I did over the weekend was I did some of my own traffic count. Oh, good idea? What if traffic is the whole crux issue on which that application rises or falls? And what if he continues and says, is this tantamount to saying, I make a motion to deny this application because it doesn't meet our traffic standards, and it doesn't meet our traffic standards based on the wonderful testimony of me. Does that sound a little jacked up from a due process standpoint? Yeah, so I know that's a little weird, but this is the good news for y'all. As the judges, you can easily fix that problem by asking people to bring you information, rather than becoming your own witness. What you can do in that case, right, is that elected official should have said to the staff or town manager or planning director, remind me for the staff procured traffic study, is it possible to get more data? Or staff, can we require the applicant to do some more traffic study to bring us a broader data set and have that conversation? And you have every right to ask during the commission questions, how come you didn't do counts during peak hour staff? Does that have any bearing on whether or not it meets the criteria in our code? So use that to your advantage, right? One of your prerogatives as a planning commission is to take the time you need and get the information that you need to make a good decision. So sometimes, particularly for a contentious hearing, if it matures and you feel like there's a gap in the information, you want to ask your staff, what do we do in this situation? Is it possible to get more information, or do we have the best information we're going to get? Go ahead, Scott.
So in that situation, because I've been in that situation as a staff member and also as an applicant representative, if that happens and staff attempts to provide different or new data, and that elected or appointed official still doesn't either believe it, think it's robust enough or whatever it is, and they base their decision on a negative finding of, that no one else around them necessarily arrives at the same conclusion, could they still then protect themselves without saying, I don't believe staff, I don't believe the data, it's still information that's presented to them in a public hearing. They don't have to agree with it though.
They don't, but if you have conflicting testimony, I think it's good to have a discussion about why you're giving more weight and credibility to a specific portion of the evidence. It can get pretty granular, but if you have, on this traffic issue piece, if you say, staff, could you bring some supplemental information back, right? And you supplement, we come back to the next hearing and you say, okay, now I've looked at the new data, and based on this new data, I believe that's the credible and most important data. I appreciate the applicant's information, but I find that it doesn't meet our criteria because based on the supplemental data, that's more in line with the methodology that we use, right, that it doesn't meet our traffic standards. I appreciate the effort by the applicant, but I think it's lacking because of this, right? And hopefully it all lines up with the staff report. I'll give you an easier worst case scenario. Sometimes there could be this situation where we just feel like we have to vote no, but if all the evidence points to yes, what do we need to do?
That's kind of what I'm getting at.
We need to vote yes. Yeah, your job, this adjudication process is evidence-based. Sometimes you'll have a room full of people who just say vote no, but they offer no credible evidence as to why you should vote no. So where are we going to go with that one? we're gonna vote yes. The opposite is true, sure, also, if the staff report and the testimony and the evidence all points to turning it down, but the applicant's saying, hey, I'm a great person and I gave a lot of money to the Christmas drive last year and this and that, that's all irrelevant testimony. It's what is the actual evidence that bears on the criteria in your code say, and that's the evidence, you have to follow the evidence where it takes you. That make sense? Yes, Madam Chair.
There was an incident, I'm not gonna go too far on that, but the word abstain came in from a vote. How does that work?
Abstain?
The person didn't want to vote yes and they didn't want to vote no, so they abstained.
Yeah, so I don't want to get too close to a live one, and maybe it sounds like a little bit of a
Okay,
live one, but
that's a lawyer one.
that's a lawyer one.
Okay.
Yeah, except for
That
this,
doesn't happen.
except for this, you might have a local rule. Among our 290 members, just to give you a sense of the lay of land, some of them have rules, local rules that say, if you're an elected or appointed official, you're required to vote unless you're legally prohibited from voting, like a conflict of interest. Okay? Abstaining, if you have a conflict of interest, isn't enough. You will have violated the code of ethics if you sat there and participated in the full discussion, and then at the last moment, you surprise everyone by saying, I abstained. And we'll talk about why that's a violation of the code of ethics in a minute. If you abstain because it's a hot potato, I would encourage you not to do that, because there's only 12 people in town that have the power to make these decisions. So if it's at the elected level, people elected you to make these tough decisions. If you are on the planning commission, it's council had faith and trust in you to appoint you to this position. They want you to participate. Yes, it could be tough. And yes, in today's climate of incivility, it can feel pretty risky to cast a vote when all the evidence points to yes, and I'm gonna vote yes, and people are gonna be bad, but they'll respect you for it. Because you will have made the tough decision through a proper process, applying the proper criteria, right? And that's a good place to be. Yeah, it's true, with planning commission, you're sometimes gonna make decisions, right, and make recommendations, you're looking around the room and go, oof, I'm not gonna make 100% of people happy here, no matter what I do, but that's okay. You know, we appreciate that, the town appreciates you doing the tough work, right? Making the heavy lift on these things, yeah.
What about in the instance of, it's come up in the past where, let's say the information in a hearing was just an enormous amount of information to digest in a short period of time.
Yeah.
And you as a council member or commission member might feel like you didn't have enough time to properly, digest it, review it, and be able to be a judge, because it's just, you got inundated with 500 pages in a week's time to digest. What, I guess, would you suggest to ensure the process is followed properly? Like, would you say, make a motion to continue it to give the commission more time to review it? Or if you're feeling the pressure that you have to review it and make a vote for whatever reason?
Yeah, I don't know if you have a local rule, and I'll open it to Scott in a second. But in terms of from where you sit, there usually are not specific deadlines by which you have to make a decision. You might have some ordinances, you might have some state laws that'll apply to specific applications where you have to make your decision or recommendation within a certain timeline. If that's not there, and it's majority rule here, if the majority determines that we'd like to continue this matter, then you have the right to do so, okay? But make sure that when you continue the matter, right, it's only for you to further study the packet and study the information that's part of the record. You know, I've had these vibes once in a while where there's a tough decision to be made and we continued it, and I got the sense of like, well, the reason they're really continuing is because they want to chat with people that they take their counsel from. No, can't do that. That's a due process violation, right? But if, yeah, we've got this queued up and turns out that the packet was a couple hundred pages long, and the other thing that happens that I think helps the people in the audience is if it's a particularly contentious one, we got a huge packet, we know this one's going to take some time. In those, if it's a real emotional one too, one of the things you could do is you could decide whether or not for that first night that we consider it as a planning commission, we just tell people all we're going to do is listen. We're not going to make any decisions. Sometimes for real tough ones, that takes the temperature down. Everybody knows, and then they have faith and trust in you all. by understanding, oh, the planning commission knows this is a big thing to digest. And they're gonna take the time, and tonight's, they're just gonna listen to the staff report and to the applicant and to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hours of public testimony, whatever it may be, but not make a decision. And then they're gonna continue it. And that then gives you some room between meetings to digest everything and further study the packet. Was there a hand up? Yes, sir.
Going along that same line. Thinking, if someone's thinking, well, gosh, a lot of information is going on, more information is coming in. At that point, can you say, I'd like to table this to next meeting, so give us more time to digest the new information coming in. Can you do that?
Is that stuff that's coming in during the record of the meeting? Does that happen?
We shouldn't have a situation where there's new information being presented at a meeting,
Yeah.
but
it happens.
I don't know. Have we had that happen recently?
You know, like there was public comment where we get the
Yeah.
that comes up so close to the
Yeah.
time, but that's really.
Right.
Yeah.
During the hearings for the PUD that just got their first few houses approved, we did have somebody walked in with a petition, copies of the petition that had been spread around, and that was distributed, to the planning commission, and then ultimately ended up in staff's lap. And we certainly needed to process that because there were members of the, I think, council who had signed it.
Yeah.
So we,
Yeah.
we absolutely did have to process that new information. But that's really all that I can think of. Everything else is just people coming to public comment and commenting on the
Yeah.
plans that are publicly available, so not new.
Yeah, and I don't mean to be glib about petitions either, but if it's one of these petitions that says, that someone stands up and says, I have a petition here where the community, I got 500 people here who say you ought to turn this thing down. The first thing you ought to be asking yourselves is, staff's gonna grab it and look at it, and most petitions pose a question, right? What relevant evidence is on there that relates to the criteria? I've never seen a land use code that says applicant, proponents, or opponents, if you submit a petition with more than X number of signatures, you win or you lose. I've never seen a land use criteria based on results of a petition. In my mind, petitions are almost, or if not completely, irrelevant to your decision-making process, because a petition in and of itself that just says vote yes or vote no adds nothing substantively to the actual criteria, right? It's not talking to the traffic study. It's basically trying to supplant your deliberation and obligation to vote on it. It's just trying to tell you how to vote, right? But it's not adding any substantive evidence to your deliberations.
Well, maybe to Daryl's point, there's been times where there have been, you have, let's say, town staff engineer's opinion in front of us.
Yeah.
And then you have some engineer who stands up at the podium and says, I'm an engineer and I disagree with everything on the engineer's report. And that's just hearsay, right? So we can listen to that engineer say that what the town engineer says is not true, and we have to digest it in the hearing as evidence, but it's still the town, we have to stand at some point on the town staff's experts.
Right. Yeah, well, in that situation, if that's all he said, all he got was opinion testimony that he disagrees, I assume the engineer report has got more substantive evidence, right, underneath it. So, if you wanted to explore that issue, you could during questions say, I'd like to go back to the engineer's report and stick to your criteria. First, I'd like to ask staff, does the information in the engineering report, to the extent it bears on our approval criteria, right, is that information accurate and correct? Yes. I suppose you could, if you wanted to, you could say, well, the question I understand, when somebody commented that they were a professional engineer and they said their opinion, that they disagree. I'd like to just explore that a little bit. I think that would be unusual, because if that person they get their 5 minutes to offer their evidence. If all they're offering is opinion testimony and their 5 minutes are up, then all they've done is offer you opinion testimony. And you ought to weigh that opinion testimony against the substantive evidence that you've received. Again, it's just I think it's a more nuanced way of looking at, a room full of people who just say, vote no. It's opinion testimony,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Your decision has to be more granular, has to
Right.
be based on the substantive evidence that you get.
Right.
Sam, can I drill down on that just a little
You
bit?
bet, yeah.
Because this is another common situation where you have a quasi judicial hearing for, let's say, a conditional use permit or a
Right.
special use permit. And the neighbors are in the audience. The neighbors provide testimony. Hey, what your packet doesn't include is 20 years of whatever our relationship is as neighbors, and here's all the bad things that have happened, or here's how I've been injured, or maybe more to the point, here's how this proposal is going to injure my property that hasn't been adequately analyzed or considered.
Yeah.
What do they do then?
Well, I assume the staff report, if you've got something that relates to the neighborhood, you're gonna have already spoken to that.
Yeah.
So you have to decide whether the issue they're raising is relevant to the criteria, right?
Mhm.
Or if it's an issue that's either not one that you can handle or is resolvable by some other method, right?
Okay.
I'll give you an example of somebody that's always been a vacant lot, and I, as the neighbor, show up and say, don't let them build there, because once they build there, then I'm not gonna have my afternoon sun. Staff, does that bear on our criteria?
If it's a compatibility criteria and the applicant's asking for a variance to lessen the setbacks or increase the height of the building, perhaps.
Yeah, exactly. Because, it gets nuanced, but on the other hand, it's like, to the extent our code considers that, we consider it through scaling and massing and setbacks, right? And so this application does or doesn't apply, or is requesting a variance from, so that's where we need to focus our energy. I understand the emotional perspective of the neighbor, but this property is not zoned for vacancy. To be vacant, it obviously took some time for it to be developed, but that doesn't create an entitlement, nor does it frame our discussion that our power is to make it vacant forever. That would be a taking of the property. We just, hey, notwithstanding your zoning entitlement, you're not allowed to develop. That's not allowed, right? Unless it's within that zone that is open space or ag, right, or something like that. Okay, is that helpful on that?
Yes.
Okay, let's go on to the next slide. A couple other things, so discuss and consider quasi judicial matters only at your duly noticed public hearing. Who agrees with this notion? That's kind of a lonely part of the job. Right? Because we all know what happens, controversial development application coming up, and it's only natural for the citizen, but their natural inclination is, I need to get to my planning commissioners or my elected officials and tell them why they ought to vote yes or no. So you got to stay back from that, right? Remember, you hold the power to make the decision or recommendation, right? So just wait till the matter is ripe for your involvement, and that means wait until your public hearing. Irrespective of the level of buzz going on out there in the community, you get to make the decision, but with that responsibility, make sure we stay fair, unbiased, stay out of it until it's here in front of us at our public hearing, okay? We'll talk more about this in a minute, but once you make a decision, let the decision speak for itself. And recognize that as a commission, right, even if you have one of those 3-2 votes, right, we're fiduciaries of the organization, right? It's our fiduciary obligation to make sure that we respect, we don't have to like it if we had a difference of opinion about how the criteria ought to apply, but we certainly can't attempt to affirmatively undermine it. So let's go to the next slide. I'll give you an example of that. Let's go through the scenario. So the top scenario, we recently approved this is based on a real life situation, by the way, a claim situation at Sursa. We had a approved controversial site development plan, and we resolved the fire district or fire department's concern with a condition of approval that required the developer to obtain a fire access, basically an easement over the neighbor's land. That makes sense. Fire department wanted a secondary access. The neighbor was even at the hearing and testified that he's willing to grant the easement. That's kind of good news, I guess, from the, So one of our members who voted against the project, it was a 4-3 vote. Guess what he did a couple of days later? He approached the neighbor to suggest that he not grant the easement. Good idea? Yeah, gets up to this larger issue. You have to remember that, yes, we're all private citizens too. and we're all part-time volunteers essentially. Do you get paid for being on the planning commission?
So,
Little bit,
Little bit.
little bit.
We haven't had a raise in 20 years.
Yeah, you're below minimum wage with the work you put in, right? So,
To be precise, I'd say 17,
yeah,
since Battle Mountain first came through.
It's okay, we don't need a raise.
Yeah.
The town is.
We're fine.
good, we're
fine.
good.
I have
Half
asked,
of,
I
half
have
of nothing is
I-
still nothing.
I have asked my commissioners, would they stay if they didn't get a raise, and every one of them
Yeah,
said
it ain't
yes.
the salary, it ain't the gifts, it's love of community.
They didn't get money,
And a
period.
commitment to doing the right thing that brings us this. But you have to recognize that sometimes we butt up against this idea, but I'm a private citizen too. You can't take the hat off that easily. In the eyes, right, of the community and in the eyes of the law in this situation, you are always a commissioner. If you're on the 3 side of a 4-3 vote, it's your fiduciary obligation to not do things that undermine the decision. This situation, in terms of real legal liability, created the liability exposure of whether this individual was tortiously interfering with the prospective business advantage that had just been conferred on the developer by agreeing to approve their application with conditions. You can't just throw off the hat and say, now I'm a private, you were a member of the same board. Yes, you voted no, but it's all one board. The voice that's important is the voice of the planning commission. Okay, what about this one? For prior comments, it seems that one of our members generally disfavors any additional gas stations, kind of like my elected official with the banks. We have an upcoming conditional use hearing for a proposed gas station, and the member has been asking staff to include information about pollution and environmental impacts posed by gas stations in the packet, and has been posting on social media about the upcoming hearing. What do you think? Is that something the planning commissioner ought to be doing in that case?
No.
Yeah, planning commissioner is the judge. The judge. These things sound a little more like steering the application one way or the other, or advocacy, right? The judge, as the judges, your voice is on a higher plane, you got a higher power. So you need to be cognizant of the fact you have to set aside any temptation or desire to steer things or advocate for things, okay? Let's go to the next slide. All right, let's pivot to go back to this fancy word I used earlier called ex parte contacts, ex parte communications. Paid way too much law school tuition for that phrase. Ex parte just simply means outside the hearing communications, right? So one of your
Can I ask
critical,
a question back on that last slide?
yeah, you bet.
So like if we ask for previous like decisions or work like on what, like the annexation agreement, does that conflict like with me, like I wanted to read what previously had been approved?
So the,
Well, go ahead and then I'll add.
so the question relates to a pending subdivision application that also happens to be located in an area that was annexed. And the request was, can staff provide the annexation agreement from 2011, so you have some context?
And understand the terms of the annexation.
And that's a
Yeah.
live,
With
It's
it
a
not
live
on
one.
the agenda.
Okay, it's a live one. We'll
It's a
talk.
live one.
Sorry. we'll
It's a
talk about
live
it.
one. I will say this, if it ends up, that there's a possibility of it coming forward, you do need, and I know this can be frustrating from the planning commission perspective, but you have to make sure you understand that there's gonna be portions of that puzzle that are outside your jurisdiction, right? Because annexation agreements involve contract matters, that's probably the council's prerogative,
Got it.
right? So is there anything in the annexation agreement or what pieces of it might bear upon the criteria for the particular application at this particular point in time?
Yep.
And if there are none, then really you wouldn't want to bring it forward. On the other hand, if there is annexation agreement language that relates to some decision that you might be making about whether a use is permissible, right? Then that might be relevant, right? So, but staff's got to help you queue that up.
Okay, so staff will guide us what portions of that is relevant versus not. Good, thank you.
Okay,
Great way to answer.
thank you for that. Okay, so this critical piece is to avoid engaging in ex parte communications, which just means outside the hearing discussions with interested parties, right? I'll give you some examples of that, just to show you how it sets up this due process unfairness, right? Would it be fair to meet with the applicant outside of the hearing to discuss the pros and cons of their application? No. or to email your fellow planning commissioners before the hearing, before you've heard the evidence, to talk about why you would vote yes or no, right? Or to attend meetings. I don't know if you have this in your community, but sometimes if people who are opposed to something will get a little coalition together and they'll have meetings to work on their strategy, right? But that's their strategy, right? Yes, sir.
So the second bulletin point, the emailing,
Yeah.
just make it more broad rather than just emailing. Is it proper or not proper to ask another board member outside the board, the meeting room, what do you think?
On a quasi judicial matter?
Ask them that question. What do you think on this?
I think it's improper. Yep. Yeah, we're gonna talk about open meetings in a minute, which applies to 3 or more, but for quasi judicial matters, even one-on-one is problematic. Because what it's basically saying is the panel of judges are discussing the matter before, amongst themselves. Why is it even a problem? Before they've heard the evidence. That suggests prejudice. How can I have a view? How can I share how I decide I'm gonna vote before I've even heard the evidence, right? A judge wouldn't do that, they'd say, so.
Does that relate to once it is only an open application? And the reason I
You
ask that,
predicted my next slide.
we're a very, very small town.
Yeah,
And very often the people on the street know more than the people on this board.
yep,
And then the gossip gets out.
yep.
So that's why I asked that.
Gossip is its own process. The rule, I'll make it easy for you, the rule is a line in the sand. Again, no matter how much the buzz is, right, and I'm gonna get a couple slides forward to touch on that issue and some tools around it. No matter what the buzz is, as the 5 people that are gonna make that recommendation, we have to conduct ourselves like judges. Let's skip ahead. I think this would be helpful. One more slide. Even one more. When does this prohibition kick in? Then we'll come back, right? So that's a live one you want to ask your town attorney, but I'll give you my source of viewpoint. I've had developers' attorneys tell me the bright line for the application of this rule is once the application is submitted to the planning director, then there's no ability to communicate with the judges. To me, that's too bright line of a rule. You can see it now in my hypothetical. Developer walks up to you and says, I'm gonna submit a site plan tomorrow to Scott, but before I do that, let me tell you all the reasons you ought to vote yes or no. That sound fair? It's just not that, it's not that simple, right? We need to be constantly vigilant as the judges to have our antenna up and be willing to stiff arm people when they're trying to approach us one-on-one and say, hey, I got this specific piece of property, I'm thinking about doing this, what do you think? I think it's fine on like comprehensive planning or in your legislative role, to sit down and have a cup of coffee with each other and get to understand each other's viewpoints. Or even if a developer says, hey, I'm new to town, I'd just like to understand generally what the philosophy is around growth and what that's fine. But but if you sit down with the coffee and they say, hey, thanks for your thoughts and thanks for pointing me to staff, and I know you got a lot of great comprehensive planning documents, I'll get together with Madison and Scott and learn more about that. But while we're here having the coffee, I've got this piece of property down at, 101 Main that I'm thinking about, tearing down and putting up a mixed use. What do you think? What do you want to do then?
Say, I'm sorry, please go call Scott and Madison.
Yeah, let your staff run interference.
I've done that.
Yeah, have staff run interference for you. Use them to your advantage because I want you to stay in the game. That's a great power to be one of the 5 people who can decide these things. I don't want it to circle back ever into an objection or even gossip or concern. Perception can be a problem here, right? It even happens small or big town, objectors, if they're engaging in scorched earth tactics, they may even raise it. I saw that planning commissioner at lunch with the applicant. What did they talk about? All right, it is a lonely part of the job. So it's just, you want to be cautious and guarded. I say it because I want to keep you in the game, right? I think I'd also suggest that we need to be cognizant of and be willing to let go of some other stuff that in our love of the community we might otherwise want to undertake, but once we become a planning commissioner, we have to be willing to let go. Like the idea of being a deal maker or working on specific types of projects. Hey, You know, before I got on planning commission, I was a real vocal advocate of mixed use, residential over retail. I want to see more of that. But now I'm on planning commission, you know, I got to step back from trying to go find developers who are willing to do that, right? Or talking with people about who I know are going to be filing specific applications, right? We could be seriously getting ahead of the commission, and you could be getting into a situation where opposers then say, hey, wait a second, that person's been overly involved in these issues to the point of being involved in the site type of things that are coming up in this quasi-judicial hearing, right? That all makes sense? Okay, let's back up a slide or two. All right, on the legal side, it's true that the rules are somewhat in your favor. A person who wants to actually bring a legal challenge based on ex parte communications has to show that they were prejudiced by the ex parte communications, and I'll give you a real life example out of Denver. Had a decision maker there who was having email communications back and forth with the developer, right? And the people who were opposed to the application got those emails through an open records request, brought a legal challenge, and said that person should not have participated because they were engaged in communications with the developer. The court, favorably on the legal side, said, well, it occurred, but there's no showing of prejudice. Well, one of the things that happened was that person, once she realized she made mistakes by reaching out to the developer, she decided, well, I'll eliminate my problem by, I'll just vote against the application. So that anybody who claims that I was in cahoots with the developer, they can look at the fact that I voted against the developer, right? And now I'm in the clear. Well, were we really in the clear? No, we had a 2.5-year lawsuit, right, with all the attendant legal fees, right? A trial court decision against us before we got up to the Court of Appeals and won. But where's the real damage? Faith and trust in the system, right? Because there's still that residue of the planning commissioner talking, or the decision maker talking to people outside of the hearing, right? So another dynamic that I've seen lately, please don't do this, once in a while, whether it's at a city council or a town board or a planning commission, once in a while, there'll be heads down and people will be texting each other. I think, yeah, that has this weird dynamic of almost being a secret meeting within a public meeting.
If that happens,
By the
I'll
way-
just throw a shoe at you.
Yeah.
Maybe we should have a box to put our phones in before we get into
Yeah.
the meeting.
That kind of thing. I've had not full-blown litigation on that, but I've had core requests, public records requests for the text messages, and we had to turn those over, and those were embarrassing. We didn't have litigation, but it's, again, it's the faith and trust risk of we're just not doing, we shouldn't be doing those things. Okay. All right, let's go forward. So staff probably got some suggestions for you, and whatever it looks like to you, you want to have some talking points to help smooth over this sort of intersection of community expectations and your responsibilities as a quasi-judge, right? Here's a talking point that I think helps, you know how it goes. Maybe the citizen corners you at the coffee shop and says, hey, I want to talk to you about that site plan. No, whatever it looks like to us, have some talking points ready. Say, hey, look, it's not that I don't want to talk to you. I'd love to talk to you. I'd love to hear from you. But as a decision maker, I can only talk to you about the hearing, right? So if you can come to the hearing, please come. If you can't, you can submit written comments. I think the way, in all the years I've been doing this, I think what it helps show the citizen the importance of this is to flip it around and remind them, hey, citizen, I know this isn't your application, right? But if it were your application, right, would it seem fair to you if the decision makers were having conversations with people about your application outside of a meeting room where you could hear what's being said about your application, and you were deprived of the ability to hear that and respond to it? That's the whole point of fundamental fairness. That's why the Constitution requires that we do all of this just in this room. Okay? Some of our members, they put like an FAQ up there for citizens on the website explaining what the quasi-judicial process is. If that's something that sounds attractive to you, you can do that, and then you all can have staff run interference. Hey, I can't talk to you because it's a hearing that's coming up. Our staff can explain why, or we've got something on our website that can explain why. Do you all get emails from citizens about applications every once in a while? if you get those, just send them to staff. And you can even ask staff, hey, look, I got this, I didn't ask for it, but here's somebody, they sent me this long email about, I forgot the name of the big project, Elk something? No,
Minturn North?
Minturn,
North.
Minturn North. They sent me this long email about the zoning application for Minturn North. You can just, don't respond, just send it off to Scott and Madison. They'll look at it, they'll say, look, we got it, we'll put it in the packet, right? If you want them to, they can respond back on your behalf and say, hey, dear citizen, hey, just let you know, we're the planning staff, we're responding on behalf of Commissioner Boyd, just want to let you know he's not able to talk with you about this issue, but we will have a hearing and we'd love to hear from you. That kind of thing, and then it's taken care of. If you feel like you have to respond, staff can help you work up a talking point along the same lines. You feel like it's important that the email come from you.
Just don't email.
I don't even do
Now,
it.
email's a nice thing, and I'm not a Luddite, I'm not anti-technology, I'm just saying as judges, I want you to be.
Normally, the emails come into the town, go to staff, and staff will either read them or put them into the packet and give us copies, so we usually don't deal with that.
But it is a small town. People do know everyone's email sometimes.
Yeah, they need to find, they may even know your social media.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, let's go forward a couple of slides. There's one more scenario, just to serve as a segue here. So, what do you think of this scenario? Commissioner Nile can't attend the commission meeting next week, on which we're gonna have a conditional use request. Over the weekend, he emails Commissioner Tammy to tell her she should vote no, because there's not enough parking. She responds and copies in another commissioner telling them both that the number of proposed bedrooms is a huge concern. And then Bruce responds back to the other two saying, hey, look, there's a lot of social media buzz around this thing. And the citizens don't like group homes. People around town don't want us approving these things. Concerns?
It's 3 people, it creates an illegal meeting.
Yeah, there's an open meetings issue going on. As I talked about, even the one-on-one is problematic because it's the judges. But what about the notion of, as a commissioner, if I'm out of town for business or vacation, don't I have the right? Can't I leave my thoughts with somebody else on my behalf?
Town staff,
I think it must be present to win.
is it?
I think it is. But just, you may have thoughts on that. I don't know if you allow virtual meetings or whatever that looks like to you, but I don't think it's a best practice, right, to leave your talking points behind. Yeah, I think it's better to just say, I'm gonna sit this one out because I'm not gonna be there. Because I think citizens expect in the due process clause that the extreme requires that you deliberate collectively as a group. Make sense? Yeah, okay. All right, social media, well, let's go to the next slide and I'll touch on social media. I just want to pivot and talk about a couple other rules that you're subject to. So the ex parte rule applies to one-on-one communications. Of course, beyond that, you all know this. But beyond that, let's just touch base on the open meetings law, right? We're all familiar with that. But particularly for the new folks, just a reminder, the planning commission is subject to Colorado open meetings law. Basically says this: whenever 3 or more members of the commission want to discuss public business, that's a meeting that has to be open to the public. So that's where you spotted the violation in that, right? The other thing it says is action can only occur in a duly called, properly agendized meeting. You can't do straw votes, you can't do any polling, we all know all that stuff. We know that a meeting includes any kind of gathering to discuss public business, whether it's by phone, by email, or by text, right? So that's why staff is gonna tell you, in addition to this quasi judicial, don't do it one-on-one. Obviously, don't use email to discuss even legislative, like comp plan or development regulation updates among 3 of you by email, because the open meeting law requires that occur here. What about social media? Are you an active social media community?
Oh, yeah, but I'm not.
All right.
I'm not.
I asked this question once for one of our other members, and somebody chimed in, this town runs on social media. And I said, oops. Well, you haven't got, that's good. But do you have personal social media? Do you have one of these community, like Nextdoor or something like? Okay, so fine. That's its own world. That's not our world. That's not the place to adjudicate land use decisions. I know it could be frustrating that if you're scrolling through and you see all, first of all, if you see that the social media is starting to talk about some land use application, quasi judicial matter, that's when you want to turn your attention elsewhere. Don't even read this stuff. But let's say before you even did that, or maybe your friend calls you and says, oh, I know you're on the planning commission. Have you been reading this stuff on social media? It's complete disinformation. It's all lies. What do you want to do with that? You want to jump in? No. If it becomes that extreme, let staff look at that and decide, do we really need to jump into that fray? Now, it is true that like for high profile controversial developments, there may be such a demand for information before the hearing, but staff can do that piece. Maybe they dedicate a link on the website. Click here for information about Minturn North, right? And those kinds of things. I was the city attorney when, and they're still going on, but back in my day, I was city attorney for the city that was considering the redevelopment of the storage tech site in Louisville. Huge news item, So we put up a dedicated site where people could go and.
I worked in the mailroom there, by the way.
Awesome. So we put up a dedicated site, and that allows you as commissioners then to say, look, I'm not gonna get involved in that, and we don't care about this information. People can go to www.minturn.gov, and there's a place where they can click there. The people who don't wanna read it and wanna perpetuate this information, they're gonna keep doing that. Citizens who wanna read good information from the town about it, they'll go to that site. Yeah, next slide. Let's talk about ethics real quick. Just recognize, as a home rule municipality, you have the power and ability to adopt your own code of ethics, and you have adopted your own code of ethics here in Minturn. And ethical scandals sometimes are kind of exciting to read about when they don't involve us, right? I love reading about them when they involve the county or the state legislature, right? But here's my more practical comment. Codes of ethics can kind of seem like they're in a faraway place and kind of legalistic, because they are. But you want to plow through the rules a couple of times to make sure you get a good working familiarity with what's required. So that you know in advance what the expectations are. And you're never surprised by a situation where at the last moment, some conflict issue comes up. Or even worse yet, sometimes we've had situations where an allegation of ethical violation is made, and the response is, I didn't know that was contrary to our code of ethics. That's a tough situation to be in, because once the bell rings, you can't unring it, right? So make sure you become familiar with your own code of ethics, right? It's there in your municipal code. Staff can help you find a resource at the town manager's office, right? The one that comes up most often is conflict of interest. Just understand what constitutes an interest for purpose of the conflict of interest, and make sure you do what's required. Hey, we're all allowed to own property in town, right? And many of us, if not all of us, do. And we're not prohibited from handling our own affairs with respect to our property, but if it's a matter that comes in front of the planning commission, right, then we're in a conflict of interest situation. Let's say you're, doing a addition on your home, and you need a variance, and you've got to come in front of the planning commission. What's your obligation?
Step down.
Yeah, right when the chair calls that matter up, you need to say, Madam Chair, I need to make a disclosure. I have a conflict of interest in this matter. I'm going to step away from the commission's discussion. I'm not going to participate in the vote. Do you leave the room?
Usually they go to the lobby
Yeah,
Unless they're the applicant.
unless they're the applicant, but I have a question on that.
yeah.
If they're out there, they can hear it all, is that okay?
That's okay. I'm worried if I don't know if you have a non-influence rule, but so it's something to look at, staff can check. Like the state code of ethics says, the 4 pillars are disclose, recuse, don't vote, and don't attempt to influence the other decision makers. That last one, I don't know if it's expressly stated in your code of ethics or not, but I do think the due process clause, right, probably requires that, right, at a minimum. So I worry, in this situation where somebody says, okay, I do everything right, I step down, I'm gonna sit in the back, and then somebody on the commission says, I have questions for the applicant. who's here to speak for the applicant? And the person with the conflict says, I'll answer those questions. Right? And hey, maybe you can get away with it. Maybe it's a softball. Just one question, very simple question. Can you confirm how big the lot is? That's probably won't get you into trouble. That's objectively verifiable. Oh, it's 7,000 square feet. Oh, and by the way, you're gonna love the project. I'm using high quality architectural finishes. We're gonna have lots of great landscaping, right? I'm gonna be very kind to the neighbors. What does that sound like?
Sales
Influence.
pitch.
Influence. An attempt to influence, right? So you'll want to check with the town attorney or staff, follow up on what the influence rule is. But I think in that situation, it's much better, both from the legal risk exposure and from public appearances, to have someone else do your talking for you. That's when your architect or consultant or somebody else ought to be doing the talking so that the one holding the conflict is never exposed to that situation. But I've seen it quite a bit, whether it is for sport, out of political spite, personal animosity, or it had real traction to it. I've seen people raise that non-influence objection to embarrass people or file ethics complaints based on it. Even for people who've done everything else right, they've said, hey, it's an ethics violation to improperly attempt to influence the decision makers in a matter in which you have a conflict of interest. So check on that piece of it, all right? I hope that's helpful. Confidential information, you don't get much of that, do you? Yeah, once in a blue moon, the town attorney might send you a memo with some legal analysis of a zoning related issue that comes up.
I think once. that I
Once.
think of.
Once in 4 years that I've been
Yeah,
here.
it's got a big red stamp on it, so
Exactly
we
what I was thinking about.
There's attorney-client communication, so we know that it's our obligation to protect those and not to hand those out. And then gifts. You probably have a gift rule, right? But here's the easy thing, just to be respectful of your time. In matters of gifts, timing and context is everything, right? Just don't accept any gift, no matter what its value, if it's obvious the gift is being offered to influence your action on an application, right? Or to reward you, or to get you to depart from the faithful and impartial discharge of your duties. We all have friends and business colleagues in the community, and we may even have like holiday meal with some business owner in town, right? But if next week is the week that they're bringing their final site plan forward, this is not the week, right, to accept the invitation to the Rockies game. Even those have de minimis value, those tickets, right? Right? You know, so ethics is one of those areas where we also remember that even if we clear the actual ethics code issue, whether fair or unfair, in matters of ethics, sometimes perception equals reality and reality equals perception. So whatever that looks like to you, yes, Madam Chair.
What if you open your front door and there's a gift sitting on your front stairs?
Get it off.
But they're edible.
Or a Cadillac.
Can you just eat them, have they disappear?
You know, I want to talk with the attorney. I don't know if you know who it was from, and it was from someone who's got an application coming down, and you know who it was, you think of the staff, they reach out and say, hey, look, we appreciate the gesture, but we can't accept these gifts. What would you like us to do with it? And they say, do this instead. Okay, send us an email, tell us that you'd like us to give it to the food shelter, and we'll do that. But our commissioners, since they're subject to the code of ethics, they can't accept it. Now, there may be a de minimis in timing. It's no bright line rule unless you're one of these municipalities that has an absolute prohibition on any gifts of any kind, then I've already told you what to do, right? But if we knew who it was and we are suspicious that, hey, this is a nice person, but hey, they got business going on with the town, more conservative thing is just to decline the gift and find a way to do that. So, yep. So back when I was a town attorney, you know, we had, particularly I was the town attorney for a growing community, had lots of developers, lots of huge home builders. Every year, someone would show up, big gift basket for staff during the holidays. Like, oh, it's this little thing. And I said, well, staff, you're not the decision makers, so lucky you get to eat all this stuff, right? Because it wasn't, you know, until the developers on the side, hey, if you were trying to influence the decision maker, they don't have the power to make the decision, so they enjoyed your food. And it wasn't a problem under the code of ethics. But for you all, as the decision makers, it would be potentially an attempt at improper influence. That makes sense? Yeah. Okay.
When someone brings a box of donuts to the meeting. Just sets them back there. Yeah, I'm okay with that. I'm okay.
Next time, remember.
Lynn brings candy like,
Yeah.
you know.
Here's a weird one,
I
here's a
bring
weird one about
candy
our staff, that is
Chocolate.
clearly
Right
improper.
there.
I had a developer show up once with a money tree. This was money tree,
Old school.
old school, money tree. Came up and it was, you know, and we tried to, as a developer without, not thinking about it rightly, thought it'd be a great idea to show the planning commissioners how much money you'd raised for the Christmas toy drive by bringing in the money tree with all the dollars attached to it. And he's, you know, he's trying to say, well, it's not a, you know, improper thing under the code of ethics because I'm not offering them the money that's on the money tree, but I want them to see how much money I've got on the money tree for the police department for the toy drive. No, we told them to take it out of the room, that was improper. And focus, please. You're here for your application, we're not here for, you know, we appreciate your efforts of goodwill, but that's for the manager's office. Keep these people out of it because we want them to not be exposed to these kind of things. All right, last thing on ethics is just recognize, you ever have this situation where everything's clear, there's no actual conflict, you've done all the analysis, but there's still a lingering perception. Hey, why is he still involved in that application? I thought he lived next door. Well, if you live next door, you're probably gonna recuse yourself, right? But if, you know, he lives in the neighborhood. Sometimes, don't underestimate the value of a clear the air disclosure. If we sense there's still this kind of gossip or vibe, we could just say at the outside of the hearing, or do you have disclosures on your agenda as a listed agenda item? During that disclosure period, you just make a disclosure. Hey, Madam Chair, you know, before we get to that item, I want to make a disclosure. I want to make sure, you know, I've heard some rumors or heard through the grapevine or from staff that some people were concerned that I shouldn't be participating because of this. I just want to go on record saying I've looked at the issue. I don't have, under our code of ethics, any interest that requires my just recusal. I want to make sure everyone understands that I intend to review this application fairly, based solely upon my analysis of the standards that apply. And yes, it's true that I was a college roommate with this person, or this person and I were on ski patrol back in the 80s. But that is in no way going to influence my analysis of this application. And I think a lot of times in ethics, like when there's not really an ethics problem, people just still want to know, you know, what's going on. And so sometimes the context may be right to make that kind of disclosure. Okay. Yeah, that helpful? Okay, let's pivot back to stuff about due process. And let's talk about what happens after the hearing. This is the magical part of every public hearing, right? You got the staff, made their presentation, application, public comment. Now it's time for deliberation. And this is where the board, the commission, as a commission, right, gets to discuss the evidence, right? And this is where you get to connect the dots according to the formula that's on this slide, right? You're gonna take what you learned at the hearing, the facts that you learned, we already talked about opinion testimony. Facts you learned at the hearing, you're gonna set them up against the legal criteria that apply to the matter, and you're gonna make your decision. This is the great part of the proceeding, to open up the staff report again to the decision-making criteria, right? And have your conversation around these criteria. The magical things going on when you have a good deliberation is that that's where you're formulating the basis of your impending decision, right? That's where the applicant and the others in the room start to get an understanding of why you're gonna make the decision that you're gonna make. They get an understanding of where you're headed. And most importantly, from a legal risk standpoint, in your deliberations, that's where we make the one and only one record of why you made the decision or recommendation the way you did. If we ever get a legal challenge, that's the one and only record that we will use the entire time. And everything will rise and fall on that record. If there's ever a court challenge, we don't get a do-over in district court. We don't get to retry the application. So what you do during your deliberations is very important, okay? All right, this is your opportunity to talk amongst yourselves. Let's go to the next slide. I would, I see you got a blue sign there with what your procedures are. I would encourage you, you know, for questioning, it's kind of a nuanced art of when do you ask your questions, right? you have, staff report and then questions. That's nice. Because you let staff get everything out. Don't jump in with questions. Let it ferment a little bit. Right? Then ask your questions, then the applicant, and then maybe you've got your questions then, right? But you don't want to have raised new questions for witnesses during your deliberations, right? I think it's best if you get all the questions out and then you're saying, okay, we're all done with everything else, now it's time for us to deliberate. And then you're turning to each other and having your deliberation. That's the time to talk amongst yourselves. During deliberations, right, the discussion belongs to you as a body. You ever have that situation, Madam Chair, where you're talking and someone sitting back here says, oh, they're waving their arm. Wait, can I? Yeah. You don't have to. You don't have to take that question. You can if you want, but what's the due process concern that comes up?
Influence.
Well, if that person got another crack at it, then somebody else over here is going, well, I'd like to respond to that person waving their hand. Now we're back to public
It
comment.
depends on what's going on, and
Yeah.
how many times they've spoken, because long time ago, we had this room with like 100 people,
Mhm.
which is rare. And people would just jump up and start talking. So
Yeah.
now, sometimes with Madison's direction, we'll look at each other and say, are you okay with accepting that? And have a body make a decision rather
Yeah.
someone, not just say, yes, myself.
Right, right. Okay, so that's a good way to go. But the follow-on would be if you allow that, and particularly if it's material, new information, I think we then need to say quickly, okay, thank you for that, whoever that was, that person. I think you need to ask, if it was new information, we need to ask, does anyone else want to speak only to the new information that was just raised? And I'll give everyone who wants to speak an additional 60 seconds, something like that. But you can't let that person tip the scale one way or the other by, skipping public comment or restricting themselves to 5 minutes, but then they get an additional couple of minutes just because they wave their arm to introduce new material, blockbuster evidence without anybody else having an opportunity to respond. That makes sense? You'll know it in the moment. You'll know it when it pops up. Yep. Okay, let's go to the next slide. In the quasi-judicial proceedings, of course, you must make your decision based on the existing standards. This does require that we put aside our own personal preferences, that we set aside irrelevant or non-existing standards, that we can't base our decision based on criteria we wish we had but don't have. I had a commissioner one time said, well, I can get over the hump and I can vote yes as long as they include an EV charging station for each of the residences. Staff, does our code require that? No. Could it? Well, maybe it could if we adopt that through the legislative, sausage making process, but we don't have that now, so we can't impose a condition that's not required by our rules, right? Don't be led astray by pressing but irrelevant considerations. Recognize it's always appropriate, right? During deliberations, if you have a question, to make that tactful inquiry of staff, right? This may be a tough issue, and maybe the whole crux issue revolves around some criteria that's kind of hard to decipher. And I noticed that you kept saying the height limit. Maybe that's a pretty important thing. Like sometimes there's debates about I'm just over, I'm just under, right? Staff, can you remind me what's the height standard and how do we measure that? And God bless the planners because they've come up with the most complicated ways to measure height limits. It's like average of the four corners at elevation, particularly in mountainous areas, right? It's the highest corner, the lowest corner, and average of whatever it is, right? But you ask them, they're there to help you and work through the criteria, right? The staff report and that checklist is very helpful. As we talked about earlier, make sure that you don't base your decision on the stuff you quote know, but that is not in the record, okay? Remember, if we have our criteria in front of us and we speak to them, then we're going to arrive at a decision that's defensible. Use what I call Sam's rule of why, because sometimes certain criteria can be a little fuzzy, but a good deliberation will bring us clarity. So next slide. You ever have one of these? And you're looking at this, and this is this is why I encourage you to use Sam's rule of why. Sometimes deliberations can start off a little rocky. Let's go to the next slide. People looking at this going, well, and the chair brings it back and says, hey, great hearing, let's deliberate. And I say, Madam Chair, I'll start. I'm gonna vote no because I don't like it. That's a little rocky. But just use Sam's rule of why. Another commissioner says, Sam, why don't you like it? Right? Well, I don't like it because it doesn't meet our standards. Keep going. Rule of why. Sam, why doesn't it meet our standards? I don't like it because it doesn't meet our standards. Specifically, it doesn't meet our design standards. Keep going. Why is that? Which standard are we talking about? And now, where are we leading ourselves, right? If this issue was already anticipated and the staff report already speaks to it, then I can just say, answer that next rule of why question by saying, because as noted on the staff report, right, where they talk about, let's go back to our picture, roof requirements. Our design standards require pitched roofs, and we do not allow flat roofs. And that's why this doesn't meet our standards. By the way, there's no other problems with this. Right?
It looks pitched to me.
Yeah, they got a pitched floor, not a pitched roof. So that's a little bit of a glib way of looking at it, but even in the most complex.
Only in Minturn.
Yeah, and whatever issue it is, traffic, architecture, design, even on the fuzzy ones, like for conditional uses, I bet you've got a criteria that's something like compatibility with the neighborhood. Is that the standard? Something like that? By the way, that kind of standard to a citizen sitting out there, they're like, or an applicant who thinks that they're going to be ruled against, that'll stand up and go, this compatibility with the neighborhood, that's so subjective, that's illegal, that's unconstitutional. Well, the idea of compatibility with the neighborhood is constitutionally defensible. That standard has actually been upheld against legal challenges. But a good record and a good decision on that kind of standard depends upon getting granular. And again, let's talk about what facts really speak to compatibility. Right? I'd like to, Madam Chair, speak to the compatibility issue. I don't think this is compatible with the neighborhood because the neighborhood has grown up to be all bungalow style, steep pitched roofs, nice setbacks, no setbacks. And this person is proposing a colonial style mansion, right? With a flat roof right up to the setback. I don't think that's compatible. Now we've got good fact-based deliberation, right, in the record of why it's not compatible. Okay, that helpful? So use the rule of why and it'll always help you. All right, next slide. This is more to our internal workings as a board. I would recommend to you, make sure, as you just did, it's wonderful, right? Check in with each member to see if they have comments. Every member ought to have the ability to speak, the opportunity to speak, irrespective of whether they want to take it. And the other thing about dynamics of a multi-member governing body is this comes up more with like legislative activity, but everyone ought to feel like our deliberation is a free and safe space for me to say, right, what I think of this particular matter, no matter how different it may be than anybody else's, right? We may get to, maybe we're working on the food truck ordinance, and by the time we get to the fourth person who's speaking, it's evident that 3 other people are adamantly opposed to food trucks. I still ought to feel free to say, this is my view on this issue, right? So make sure we do that. Let's see. You had some conditions that you imposed tonight, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. If you're adding or revising conditions, right, make sure that they're appropriate. And make sure that we've taken enough time to work through the conditions. Don't have conditioner's remorse, which is that disease that pops up the morning after when either we or the applicant are reading the conditions and it's like, that's not as clear this morning as it looked like it was last night. Or recognize also developers' regret as they agree to some condition to get it past the finish line. Legally recognize that that doesn't remove their ability to challenge the condition. Okay? So it's a useful tool to add a condition, but it still needs to be based, right, legally defensible criteria. Yes.
So this hasn't happened in all my time here, but hypothetically, if we're in a deliberation, and obviously, like you just said, there's we're deliberating, and obviously 3 people are for the food trucks.
Yeah.
Or against them, and it's Daryl's turn to talk, and he could sell you anything.
Yeah,
And Daryl changes everyone's opinion
sure.
based on what he says in the deliberation. Is there some legal standard that says, Daryl lobbied, he played a mind trick on everybody, and he got everybody to change their vote at the last minute? They were obviously gonna vote no, and Daryl sold them all, and now we have food trucks.
No, on the legislative matter, no concern at all, because that's sausage making, and what he's done is he's won the consensus building game. He was able to build consensus, and notwithstanding that fierce resistance that was initially there, he carried the day.
Yeah.
On a quasi judicial matter, I think what would be helpful to reforming the record is if you changed your mind, right, is to articulate why you changed your mind.
Daryl opened my eyes, and
Well, fact-based, yeah. Thank you, Daryl. I see what you're saying about the traffic study. Let's talk a little bit more about that. Make sure I understand your point of view. Staff, does that comport with our methodology? Does that comport with what the requirement is? Oh, I see now, right, based on what Daryl's raising, that, yeah, I'm changing my mind on the respect to the issue with the compliance with our traffic impacts, right? So if you just reform a little bit, right?
What if a vote is taken?
Yeah.
And all parties agree. But after that, one of the parties says, I didn't mean to vote that way. Or I'm sorry I voted that way. It makes it public at a public meeting.
Not a good look.
good answer.
Trust issues.
It doesn't happen that rarely. I'll just, one of my luxuries at Source is I get to come in and say things that I get to leave. So I don't know what the local dynamics are, but I used to have some elected officials, and once in a while there'd be a tough hearing, and they were reluctant to say things because there are people that they know in the audience, and they don't want to make them mad. But they vote, they clear the room, and then just before the meeting adjourned, they'd want to talk a little bit more about why they voted the way they voted. Not good. Not good. Not good. I'll give you a real live situation. I had a 4-3 vote, and the community angst was against the 4 who voted in favor of the application. And there was so much political pressure around this that the 4 decided that they needed to write a letter to the editor explaining their vote. The real problem from an attorney's standpoint was what they did in the letter to the editor is they included reasons that weren't stated during the deliberation. So by their effort, right, to try and appease folks to help them understand why they voted the way they did, was that they just opened up an avenue for challenge by the person who got denied. So not a good thing. Have a good, vigorous deliberation. Yes, it can be uncomfortable at times. Know that no matter the small group of people who are mad, in the big picture, the community supports you. They appreciate your work. They know you're doing hard work. They know you're doing work that's going to be uncomfortable sometimes, and they support a good process. But be a champion of the good process. And even if it ruffles some feathers and makes some people uncomfortable, we're going to say, based on the facts, that this is where this thing's going. I'm sorry, applicant, right? No matter what you say, I find that your application is deficient for these reasons stated in their staff report and the factual information that I've learned, and I'm just going to vote no. And that's just the way it is. They'll thank you, because when they reapply, they'll understand what's required, right, to get across the finish line if they reapply. Okay.
So like tonight's we switched from conditions to recommendations. What's like, is recommendations like a legal, like, we switched from conditions to recommendations. So like, what's the difference? And like, is it recommendations are like a tool, I guess, because you've only been talking about conditions.
Yeah, you have a thought on that? Do you have a recognized distinction?
Not particularly, but I think that goes to your point of, is it appropriate? And for me, it was based on the set of facts that we were presented.
Yeah.
We didn't have any facts that necessarily gave me any information on what the impact was going to be.
We didn't have any safety facts. I mean, there was no like, and that was my question, which I should have articulated better.
I think you articulated it pretty well, and maybe that's a situation, just as we're learning through this presentation and discussion where, you know, if there was a concern and it needed to be tabled and you direct staff to work with the applicant to get that information, how many bikes, what do you know,
Yeah.
you know, that, what?
Yeah, that's the problem. Is that you're the applicant,
That was an
that's what-
oddball case,
If
but
it was an outside.
Wow, now we're
applicant,
talking
then-
about it after the fact. We've already voted. This is
I know,
terrible.
Yeah, so-
we
Right,
are,
sure.
but I just
Yeah,
like,
let me back it out as well.
back
It's
to
a
the
live one for you.
recommendations versus conditions.
Yeah, so sometimes what happens is in your review, and you're doing the granular lift, okay? Never underestimate the importance of your work by saying, we're just making a recommendation to council. That's, you know, you're doing the heavy lift, you're doing the work. Your hearings are typically longer than town councils on matters, because you're sifting through all the granular information. But sometimes in that process, you'll come up with, hey, on the number of parking spots. Do they meet the criteria? Yes, they meet the minimum amount of criteria. And we could say something like, that's great, I know you meet the criteria, but it seems like, you know, given this or that site layout issue, would you be willing, or, you know, can I make a recommendation that you take a look at some additional parking? And the applicant may pick up on that cue and treat, you know, in their resubmittal, and if you're one of those jurisdictions that allows revisions between planning commission and council, they'll pick up on that, and the resubmittal that they make for final review might touch on that. Well, they've done that voluntarily, that's great, and we made a suggestion and they embraced it, there's no legal risk. On the other hand, if we say, do they meet our criteria, and I recommend 3 more parking spaces, right, and it goes up without them, we're not gonna turn them down because they don't meet the parking requirement. So I think it's more of a useful tool in terms of sending a signal to the developer that, hey, it'd be good, it'd be great, we'd appreciate. It doesn't influence how we apply the criteria. But if you're doing some redesign, look at this issue, because this is important to us. If it keeps recurring, there's a better place to be if you want to legally enforce it, to go back in and do what? Change the code, increase the parking standards.
Yeah, I mean, isn't that the biggest difference, is that a condition is enforceable and a recommendation is not?
Yeah.
Well, but to Sam's point, I think, you know, not to undervalue your role, but you are a recommending body, whether you recommend a condition or just provide suggestions. And we've had both over the years that I've served this board,
Yeah.
Particularly with the design of homes and suggestions from people that are out there building homes saying, you might want to think about snow clips or this, that, and the other thing, just helpful suggestions that they take. They revise their plans, we get a building permit, and lo and behold, there's a set of snow clips on the.
That's because Michael's here.
Right.
Well, at the time that I suggested that they increase the window on Taylor Street because they had that gorgeous view and they had this little window and they came back, had changed it and thanked us for doing that. So, yeah, there's small things like that.
Yeah, things that we get to voluntarily don't create legal risk, and they're in furtherance of.
Well, yeah, and putting the crumb out there for the council to eat sometimes, right?
I hope.
Yeah. Okay, next slide. I think we talked about this piece, right, talking about explaining our vote later, we don't want to do that. In terms of flow of the meeting, right, we talked about reopening the hearing, that was the idea of someone waving their arms. Do you have general public comment at the beginning of your meetings? Okay. Yeah, we just know that if sometimes citizens aren't initiated to your processes, and during that public comment period for items not on the agenda, they're gonna wanna start talking about the hearing that's on the agenda later. We wanna head that off, right? And tell them, no, please wait. That item is on the agenda, we'll hear from you later, on that one, right?
Yeah, Lynn's already done that to me tonight.
Fact.
Let's see, and yeah, we talked about commissioner reports as well. All right, let's pivot to just one more aspect of running good quasi judicial hearings, and I'll open it up for any final questions. Probably should have covered these earlier, but just a couple of tips around running great hearings, right? So the way you run your hearing, right, and the way you conduct yourselves in your hearing goes a long, long way in building faith and trust in your system, irrespective of whatever happens legally with that, right? So make sure you follow best practices. I don't know if you use a script. If you do, use that. Yep. Yeah, be predictable. Sounds like the boring part of local government work, but people appreciate that, right? Be predictable, don't be ad hoc, so have a script or a set standard or procedure. Who agrees with this notion, knock on wood, I hope you don't face this in midterm, but sometimes the job of being an elected or appointed official is gonna require that you exercise civility even in the face of incivility. But you're up to the challenge.
That's why we have Lynn.
Not on the board. It's usually in the audience, right? Yeah, that kind of thing. So just be careful of that, right? You know, despite the chair's wonderful comments at the beginning of public comment, hey, this is your chance to speak to the application. Please help us do our job and give us information that bears on the application. Please be professional and civil. Next thing you know, Citizen Sam, 20 seconds in there, they're launching into a personal attack on you. Yeah. Well, I'm gonna get 5 minutes to engage in a personal attack. It's unfortunate, and I don't know, how we got to that place in our society, but from a First Amendment risk standpoint, we're just gonna have to grin and bear it. It's true that there are very narrow legal exceptions. If they're inciting a riot or actually engaging in sexually obscene obscenity, then we can shut that down, but you don't wanna do any of that anyway. And you've never had situations where it's gotten so rough and tumble that you need to have like an officer here?
We have, well, not that the meeting's gotten that way, but if we expect that meeting to possibly go that way, the town will have somebody around.
Yeah, so whether there's something that's going on that's contrary to criminal statutes, that's for them to decide. Yeah, the best tool for you all is if things are getting out of hand, emotions are running too high, just take a break. Just take a recess, let everybody cool down. And going in, like I said, if you know it's one of those where temperatures are high, or you can feel the tension in the room, and if we know it's one of those real big applications that's gonna take a couple of meetings, you can just feel the palpable. You can tell people tonight, we're just gonna take the staff report, the applicant presentation, and then public comment. We all agree that's where we're gonna go? You know, that's very helpful. Recognize the prerogative to maintain order when people call up during public comment. Ask them to direct their comments to you. You're the judges. You know, be wary of the people who stand up and go, what? They start talking, they start doing this, that kind of thing. Make sure they speak from the podium, have them speak one at a time because we are making a record. And do whatever else it looks like to you that helps convey a sense of, we appreciate informality. We're kind of proud of informality, but you don't want to be informal to a fault in quasi-judicial proceedings. We want to make sure people direct their comments to you, that we identify documents. If they show up, that people speak one at a time. Okay. And do encourage people to stay focused on the matter. Do you ever have that dynamic where it feels like during a quasi-judicial proceeding, it's kind of like ships passing? You know, here we are at final site plan on a 4-unit townhome project. And everybody during public comment is saying, this property should have never been zoned for townhomes to begin with. Well, that ship has sailed. Right? So, and we want to recalibrate on that, because we want people to give us information that's helpful to us. So we remind them, you could turn to staff and go, hey, could you remind everyone where we are in the process? And then you can turn to the people in the audience and say, look, we're at final site plan. The important issues during final site plan are architect, landscaping, final lot layout, and final traffic flow. So please, 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 citizens, give us information that bears on those issues. In fact, there's extra copies of the staff report. You can look through that when it comes your turn to talk to us. Please limit your testimony to things that are relevant to the final site plan. That'll help us do our jobs effectively on behalf of the citizens. And most people get that. You still get the one who says, it should have never been annexed. But that's okay. Yeah. Yeah. Do you ever have, Madam Chair, the person who asks questions despite your lovely comments? Right? So this is your opportunity to provide testimony, and they say, Commission, when are you gonna stop doing this? There's a long silence. You got the right tools.
Well, I think I've done it long enough
Yeah.
that I try to come in, if it's a big meeting, with a little prepared entrance speech.
Yeah.
And then go from there.
Yeah.
I mean, we haven't had, one time somebody, that one lady that one time came up to me and then, yeah, but the town manager was here luckily and she took over.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, be careful if you do take a recess, don't gather in groups of three, even if during quasi-judicial hearings, even if you're just talking about the Rockies. I don't know why you would talk about the Rockies, but even then, it creates a perception because the uninitiated people, oh, they just took a break during a particularly emotional portion of the hearing, and now they're over there, the three of them in a group, and they wonder what's going on over there, right? So just be careful of that dynamic and that appearance, so. Let's go to the last slide, just wrap things up. Back when I said, do you love process, right? Just recognize that the most important job for the quasi-judges is to provide great process, right? Respect, follow, be a champion of the planning commissions and the town processes, right? That you were asked to support and provide. Make sure we avoid process flaws and other acts that can create a sense of distrust, that can erode faith and trust in how we do our work. On the legal side of things, Saoirse worries about, just recognize that if you carry out your hearing properly, and if you issue a decision, right, based on the hearing record and the applicable criteria, you're going to be fine. And don't let the fear of liability drive decision-making. Every once in a while, there's an application that comes up where, in a last-ditch effort, the angry applicant who submitted an inadequate application makes a threat. You turn me down, I'm going to sue each and every one of you individually. If we know we're making the right decision based on the record, through a fair and defensible process, applying the right criteria, don't stray the course. That's what these protections, these legal protections that we have, and your insurance and Saoirse's role, that's all there to protect you, right? And so you're going to be just fine in that situation. But if we do all that, right, if we're doing the right things for the right reasons, then the interested parties, the citizens, community, right, they'll have faith and trust in how you handle decisions that affect their property, and that's just a great place to be. So, with that, thanks for inviting me out.
Did you say there was a video?
Like so many of the mistakes I make, I come up midweek and I didn't take time off to stay here tomorrow. So I gotta head back to Denver, but I'll open it up to any questions that you have, and thank you.
Oh, I thought you said there was a little video or something.
It's
No,
linked
no,
on the
it's
first.
There's some
it's a
links.
Oh, it's a link.
Yeah, we can watch the 3 or 4 minute one if you'd like the little bit.
No, we're good. We can let you.
Thanks. You need to drive home, Sam.
Because you drive 2 hours after that.
3 to 4 minutes.
And
It's 14
the 2 handouts was the ones on email, just to give you a little bit more info about do's and don'ts around email, and then that 2-page handout about thinking like a judge. So, any questions for me or things that I can?
Drive safe.
Thank you so much. Good to
Sam,
see
thank
all.
you
Good
so
job.
much. That was great.
Thanks.
Thanks, Sam.
It was very lively. I appreciate that.
About scheduling the HPC training.
Oh, okay, very good.
Thank you so much.
Thanks again.
Bye-bye.
TMS.
You did? Okay. Discussion direction items? Staff reports, did everybody read Michelle's staff report? Is there any questions of our staff? Planning commission comments?
Under staff reports, staff would like to discuss, given the breadth of the Minter North PUD project, with 39 incoming DRB applications and any subsequent changes to those applications that once they're approved, staff wanted to float the idea of potentially making distinctions between minor and major changes, and staff approving minor changes such as, a slight window moving, different doors, things like that, but bringing forth if building height changes or the building envelope changes or major windows move around and change. That way we're not necessarily processing, 39 applications 2 or 3 different times.
Do you think those changes are gonna come?
What was the question, Amanda?
Do you think that there's going to be a significant amount?
Yeah.
Jeff is like, yeah.
I have firsthand experience working with the applicant on other projects. And it should be expected that there could be numerous changes, minor changes, as these projects get built. And that's that's for each house. So the applicant has already told us that while they intended to have a handful of kind of set designs, pretty much every house is being custom designed to some degree. And again, I just think with any of our projects, any of them, we do inspections for, the end of the project. We'll go out and make sure that the landscaping is correct. Inevitably, there's something different about the landscaping plan that was up on the, a lot of times there's more trees and stuff like that on a landscape. Inevitably, window packages couldn't be delivered that match the original design. They're either slightly bigger, they're slightly different configuration, they don't have divisions or mullions in them, minor stuff. Sometimes with those, particularly materials changes and things like that, we've brought those back to Planning Commission. So you understand that it's not exactly what you approved. And I think every time those have been approved. I just know that with each one of these homes, we're going to have that situation where there's going to be minor tweaks.
Is there a possibility of you giving us, suggesting a list of what those things might be that we have to work from? And what things would not? Like,
Yeah.
You're not gonna do height, you're not gonna do land coverage, you're not gonna do impervious or pervious, but just have it listed so that it's understood. I mean, we can say yes to it right now, and then when you got around to that, that would be great. So like if it's a window change or a door change or the size of a deck change or something like that. But what absolutely will not be done just by staff.
I will attempt to put together that list. The issue for me is that that's not necessarily backed up in our code, right? The code, Appendix B, your design standards for the town, defines what a major development is, which requires DRB approval. Anything that doesn't fall to that level or rise to that level technically doesn't even need a DRB review. So maybe that's where we'll start and try to piece it, frame it or.
There was just an occasion way in the past
Mhm.
where the building had passed.
Mhm.
The planning director took it upon himself to make a big change that has forever been since a sore spot of discussion.
I may know
because of
what you're
that.
talking about.
Huh?
I may know what you're talking about.
And so I'm trying to avoid that happening.
Wish I knew what you were talking about.
Fill us in, I don't know.
Not on the record, please.
Spill it, Scott.
Well, this is many, many,
Yes.
many years ago.
Yes.
So that's why I brought that up.
After we close the meeting.
Yes.
Outside.
I mean, there's probably more than one, maybe not the one I'm thinking of, but the one I'm thinking of has always been an issue afterwards.
One of the ways that we could handle this is as we inevitably will receive the first batch of minor changes. If we feel comfortable staff approving those and bringing those back to you, or vice versa, if we don't feel comfortable, we'll bring that batch to you and you can say, these are minor changes. In the future, staff, you can go ahead and approve these. Again, the concern is there's always going to be variations in how minor and how major.
If they change the paint color, we're not gonna worry about it, that kind
No.
of thing.
But like you brought that paint color back for a house behind on Taylor Street, like last meeting, you just said it was just the
Notified you,
staff
yeah.
report.
Yeah.
Right. So we're things are still gonna be in the staff report. Oh,
Yeah, this is not going to be black box decision making and all of a sudden the project doesn't look at all like what you guys have approved, but.
No, it almost seems like there has to be some leap of faith, obviously, on our part, but by the same token, it's almost like a consent agenda thing where if it was included in the staff report,
Yeah, then we bring it up.
and it's up to us, if there's something that's on there and it's like, wow,
That
this
is a
is,
good idea.
this is
Yeah.
really,
That is a good idea.
We all
egregious,
read this
I would
down.
like to talk about this because this bothers me. Well, great, then you have the opportunity to do it, but otherwise don't
I
waste your
agree.
time.
Okay.
Because in my opinion is like, there's gonna be a lot of this, and it would take a lot of staff's time to review it, put it on the agenda, it's, have people show up, et cetera. And I think to what Rick said tonight, like, hey, somebody might wanna put in their door from their grandma's house that was on their house. And to me, that is what makes Minturn.
Right.
Let them have that. If they wanna paint their house purple, go paint it purple.
And the other aspect of that, you know, is, as Rick alluded to, I think perhaps his comment was self-serving because he doesn't want to have to do the paperwork to do all
No,
these
of course he
things.
doesn't.
We have plenty of things on our plate. And if
No, I
we're
just
bogging
wanna-
ourselves down with this extra process and so we'll
I
use
I
good
trust you
discretion
guys to
and
the
we
point
will.
where I think you both know what a major and a minor change is, and think you would never try to slip something by us. Now, down the road, there's two other people sitting in your shoes that are less trustworthy. Maybe that's an issue, but
But what you just described and what we've kind of been practicing is kind of a system or that provides some guardrails, right? If it's presented under staff reports or whatever, and you have a chance to look at what we've been doing.
well, that's why I brought up the issue about the disclaimer on his plans, because the way I read those, that kind of gives him a very wide berth to do whatever he wants and make changes even without the owner knowing it.
Right.
So I liked the fact that he said, you know, that he was going to take a lot of that stuff off, maybe when it comes time for building permit or something, but by the same token, like, that language to me was a little scary.
Glad you pointed it out.
Yeah.
Okay. So it sounds like we have direction. Okay. We won't let you down.
Thank you.
Oh, my turn, okay. I talked with the fire chief about the, construction on the highway. They are in daily contact with the construction CDOT. And if there is anything that is coming up, usually they have a good heads up as to if there's a fire or if there's a lightning strike that looks like it's gonna be a fire, they'll inform CDOT what's going on. And they can instantly change what's happening traffic wise. Also in reference to,
Wait, I just, so
sure,
their response, because right now we have, you know, the fire in Leadville. And right now, there is no way you could move all of the equipment and everything that they have on that on-ramp. Like, they're just, I mean, like, it is like,
The only way you can go is to Vail.
yeah, or you go to Vail, yeah. I'm just saying, like, it is, I hear what they're saying, but I'm still gonna be with my snorkel in the river.
okay. Yes, that they can change.
You might
can
need some
change
fins
quite a bit of
today.
stuff.
What?
You might need some fins with the way the river's flowing.
Yeah.
I got the support.
Yeah, right. But anyway, they are in touch with CDOT, daily,
Yeah.
if not twice a day.
Nice.
In reference to what's coming up with the Malloy Park, that's even tougher because there is only one way in and one way out.
That was an error.
Let's be careful with talking about.
And that was the part of the same fire question Eric asked. I had asked about this way, and then Eric had asked, in addition, asked fire wise Malloy Park.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
A way in, a way out.
Oh yeah,
in, way
for
out.
current state.
Emergency route, exit route.
There was two parts to the questions last.
The request, the fire district always has a request that there be two ways in and out, if at all possible. If there is no possibility, then you can't go with it. Just the lay of the land. Cross Creek poses the problem there.
Was that my question?
But anyway, that's the direction that they're trying to solve.
Okay.
They are looking at the Malloy Park, seeing if there is another way, but at this point, not seeing anything.
My question was about outdoor backyard fire pits.
Yeah.
And last week was a very good example. Because the house next door to me has a little house in back that has always had tenants doing outdoor fire pits. There's a new tenant. Last week, there were 3 nights from 10 until 2 in the morning that there were people there with a fire pit. And it's right at the very back of the lot. There's stones holding back the hillside, but then there's all this foliage coming over because it's that all bushes back there until before it gets to trees. And I could see from my bedroom window the flames this high coming out of that pit. Now, I believe it's a dirt pit, not one of those with a cover on it. So that's the kind of thing I wish we could find out if there was some way to control it, at least requiring the ones with the covers on to
Just call the sheriff.
resist.
That's what I've had to do.
Yeah, I think that's,
I've walked
Get a hold
over
of
to the
the
fire.
But you have
I've
to
walked-
know what the current regulations are
So it all
first.
depends on what it is in the county. Like the sheriff can go explain it. He was awesome explaining to me. Like I would just contact the sheriff because it has to do with the county. It doesn't even have to do with the Forest Service. Like Forest Service is very high. It has to do with what the county has declared as the like restrictions for this time. And then, but the only thing that he said that like is in our control is if smoke's coming in your house.
Yeah, I think Minturn, if not with the county, I think it comes down to nothing in the 30-foot setback and 10 foot from any structure. Is
Here's your-
specifically,
Here's your town code.
yeah.
This is Article 8, Air Quality Control. Open burning of a small recreational fire is permitted in conjunction with the guidelines established in the currently adopted edition of the International Fire Code for recreational fires.
And we have amendments within the fire code.
I got the
Yeah,
30-foot one with the
within the
10
fire
foot from the
code.
structure. I
And
give
when
you-
was that done?
I used to have to keep it around for a while, Scott, I'd give you a copy.
It's fine, as long as it's current in our code. It may have changed over the years, I don't know where.
Wait, can you read that one more time? Just
Sure. Open burning of a small recreational fire is permitted in conjunction with the guidelines established in the currently adopted edition of the International Fire Code for recreational fires.
And then what is, and is that, that was 6 months ago that we added it?
No, we re-adopted 2021 international codes.
Okay.
And so as part of that, we made amendments to the International Fire Code 2021 based on the Fire Protection District's recommendations.
And once, if the state bans it,
Obviously, there's a different level of government, the
Okay.
sheriff, the state, whatever. If we have those conditions, this goes out the window,
okay,
right?
and do we
If-
know
if
where the
there's a
state
ban.
is on that? No?
No.
Okay.
The only reason I said something about it is because I thought the 10 foot from the structure was good. Because years past, I've had tires burning next to my building, so.
To do that. No fire is burning.
I thought it was 10, I honestly
It's
thought it was
10.
this, I thought it was
It's
10 feet.
10 foot from the structure.
Okay,
Is that-
It is, yes.
it is
10 feet from any structure, no less than 5 feet from property lines, and no burning within 30 foot setbacks.
and then you can't burn, I know, cause our
I got
neighborhood
that.
This
burning.
one
I got
does not work
trash.
to any of that, because the building's here, the fire pit's here, the hill is here.
Then that's a
File,
sheriff.
file a code enforcement complaint.
No, do it, call the sheriff.
And then it comes, then I think it goes into, if it's an actual nuisance that's bothering you, you can definitely call the sheriff.
I would, I mean,
if they're burning trash, that's.
yeah, if trash is not allowed, I know that one.
It's not.
Don't you know the landlord?
Oh, yeah. I've mentioned it before. I'm dealing with the fence problem right now, so.
Recreational fire is defined as the burning of clean firewood where the fuel area is no greater than 3 feet in diameter and 2 feet or less in height for pleasure, religious, ceremonial, cooking, or similar purposes.
So this high probably doesn't qualify.
No, it does not.
It could be religious.
Well, at least that high from where I am, which is 30 feet away, so
2
it's
feet's
probably.
pretty low then.
Yeah.
No, it's, Yeah.
2 feet.
It's kind of like below your kneecap.
Yeah.
No, this is higher because I can see it from 30 feet away and it's like that high. Next time I'll just get out my
Just call
flashlight
the
and go
cops.
walking back. No.
Cops come a few times, people calm down.
And also,
Especially
I mean,
if
we're under
especially
fire
if they're
ban, like
renters.
maybe because we're so, if it's very high.
Yeah.
Well, that's what's worrying me is between 2021 to 2024, we have had tremendously more fires.
Yeah.
And there's one in Twin Lakes growing like crazy right now, as of this morning. And they've already got a special crew there in case it goes to the old downtown to try to protect that.
Yeah.
And I forget which direction it's going in.
Last night it was,
It was on the back side with the buildings, right?
Yeah.
It was, yeah,
But they,
that's a hell of a
I
spot
think
to
it's
get to.
between Leadville and Twin Lakes, so.
yeah.
yeah, it's right by the historic.
And with all the wind today, it's like unbelievable.
There's supposed to be some rain coming.
So it's sheriff's department.
Sheriffs, yeah. And I spoke with them, like, because my guys were super sweet, but I spoke with the fire department. They're like, maybe go talk to them first if you have a good relationship with them, and that's what I did. And they were like, oh my gosh, we didn't realize all of this, and they stopped it. Our
Okay.
neighbors did.
Well, I appreciate the info.
Thanks, Daryl.
Okay,
If you want, I can always have the chief come by and explain it all. But no, they're looking at everything and they are concerned about the access this town has. They're-
okay. Anybody have a motion?
I'd like to make a motion. Future meetings?
I'm sorry, what?
Future meetings.
Oh, future meetings.
I apologize, I didn't have the dates on there. June 26th and July 10th, the next two.
Anybody?
June 26th, I will not be here.
I'm in both.
Eric,
I can be available.
Michael,
Yeah, I'm here,
I'm here.
5:30.
5:30.
No Jeff.
I can do Zoom.
And we'll have more houses on that one?
We'll have probably 4 more houses.
What was the second date?
I'll let you know how I'm gonna vote.
July 10th.
Email it, Jeff, email it over.
Email everybody.
I'm gonna reply all and tell you all how.
Group text.
Yep.
Good to know you were listening,
my
Jeff.
blog.
Okay,
I'm shocked that we have a Minturn website.
wait a minute, we didn't
With a
make
picture of the
motion.
toilet guy coming out of the toilet.
Motion, please.
I make a motion to adjourn tonight's meeting.
May I have a second?
June
Second.
12th, 2024.
Motion by Amanda, second by Jeff. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Let's talk about how we voted.
Look,
At least, let me get my recording out. I gotta record it first.